In the southern part of New Jersey, there lies a stretch of wilderness unlike any other in the United States. Locals call it the Pine Barrens, a vast expanse of forest and swamp covering more than 1 million acres. To an outsider, it might seem like an ordinary wooded landscape, but to those who have walked its sandy trails, crossed its cedar-coloured streams, and listened to the strange noises that echo through its trees, the Pine Barrens hold an aura that is both enchanting and unsettling. The soil here is sandy and poor, earning the region its name, and the twisted pitch pines that dominate the horizon give the land an austere beauty. Beneath them grow thickets of scrub oak, cranberry bogs, and wide marshes, broken up by hidden clearings where the silence feels heavier than it should. The air can be thick with the resinous scent of pine and the hum of insects. But once the sun dips below the horizon, the barrens transform into something else entirely. For centuries, people have spoken of the strange atmosphere that settles over the woods after dark. Even before European settlers built their homesteads here, the Lenape people carried stories about spirits and dangerous beings who lurked in the dense forests. When colonists arrived, they added their own layers of superstition, blending old-world fears with the mysteries of the new land. In the Pine Barrens, the natural and the supernatural seemed to blur together. Strange cries pierced the night. Animals disappeared. Travelers lost their way on paths that seemed to shift beneath their feet. And on rare occasions, something larger, something inexplicable was glimpsed moving between the trees. The landscape itself encourages these stories. The barrens are filled with abandoned villages, forgotten mills, and ghost towns left behind by industries that failed. Glass factories, charcoal operations, and ironworks rose and fell here in the 18th and 19th centuries, leaving behind little more than crumbling foundations and moss-covered ruins. Walk among them today and you feel the residue of human life drained away, as if the forest has reclaimed what once belonged to it. For the people who lived here in isolation, far from the cities of Philadelphia and New York, the woods were both provider and threat. They offered game and timber, but they also hid dangers that could never be fully understood. Out of this uneasy coexistence, the region birthed one of America's strangest and most enduring legends. The Pine Barrens are not just the setting of this story, they are its cradle. Every culture has its haunted landscapes, places that seem to resist settlement, that grow legends like weeds. For New Jersey, the Barrens are that place, and at the center of their mythology stands a creature whose name has become synonymous with fear in the region. The Jersey Devil is said to haunt these woods, a monstrous figure that has been described in countless ways, but always with the same disturbing familiarity. A creature with wings like a bat, a head like a horse, a long serpentine neck, hooves, and a piercing scream that cuts through the silence of night. The image is grotesque, a jumble of features that seem cobbled together from nightmares. But to the people who live near the Barrens, it is more than just a story. It is a possibility, a shadow in the forest that cannot be dismissed so easily. If you follow the old dirt roads that snake deep into the heart of the Barrens, you can begin to understand why such a legend would thrive here. The trees crowd in close, and even during the day the canopy blocks much of the sunlight. Sounds carry strangely through the air. The bark of a dog or the cry of a bird can echo and distort until it sounds like something else entirely. At night, when the wind rises, the branches creak and clash together like old bones, and the darkness feels endless. In such a place, imagination and fear become indistinguishable from one another. When settlers heard a noise in the distance or saw something dart across a clearing, they reached for the stories that could explain it, and over time, those stories hardened into legend. What makes the Jersey Devil different from so many other regional monsters is not just the environment it inhabits, but the detail with which its origins are remembered. Most folklore creatures seem to emerge from a vague mist of memory, with no single tale of where they came from. The Jersey Devil, however, has a birth story, a legend tied to a specific family, a specific woman, and a specific moment in colonial history. According to the most famous version of the tale, it was in the early 18th century that a woman known as Mother Leeds found herself pregnant with her 13th child. Overwhelmed and embittered by the burden of so many mouths to feed, she cursed the unborn child in a fit of despair, declaring that it would be the devil himself. When the baby was born, the curse came true. Instead of an ordinary infant, the child twisted and transformed before the horrified eyes of those present, sprouting wings, hooves, and a long, snarling face. With a screech, the creature escaped through the chimney and vanished into the woods. From that moment on, the monster was said to roam the pine barrens, returning again and again over the centuries to terrify those unlucky enough to encounter it. This story is the foundation of the Jersey Devil legend, and it captures in miniature many of the themes that surround it: poverty, isolation, fear of the wilderness, and a sense of supernatural punishment for human weakness. To truly understand why this tale took root so deeply, one must picture life in colonial New Jersey. Families were large, survival was difficult, and the woods pressed in on every side. A woman cursed by hardship might have been seen as a figure of both pity and suspicion, and any misfortune could quickly be transformed into evidence of witchcraft or diabolical influence. The story of the 13th child reflects those anxieties. It is a parable of despair that turned into a legend of terror. Yet the creature was never confined to a single birth story. As time passed, new details were added, and new sightings were reported. Farmers claimed their livestock were mutilated or vanished without a trace. Travelers described being pursued on moonless nights by a winged figure that soared above the treetops. Strange tracks appeared in the snow, cloven hoof prints that began and ended suddenly, as if the creature had taken flight. These accounts gave shape to the legend, reinforcing the belief that something truly lived in the Barrens. The idea that the monster was not just a metaphor, but a physical being stalking the forest took hold, and once belief rooted itself, it was nearly impossible to uproot. The geography of the Pine Barrens made it the perfect stage for such a story. Stretching across multiple counties, the Barrens were sparsely populated, with small settlements and isolated farmsteads connected by narrow trails. In the 18th and 19th centuries, they were home to a marginalized group of people known as the Pineys, descendants of farmers, outlaws, and workers from failed industries who lived largely apart from the rest of society. These communities became the subject of prejudice and ridicule from outsiders, who often depicted them as backward or inbred. To the more respectable townsfolk of New Jersey, the Barrens were already a place of degeneracy and danger, and the legend of the Jersey Devil became a convenient symbol of everything frightening about the region. As with Baba Yaga in the forests of Eastern Europe, the Jersey Devil functioned both as a monster and as a boundary marker. To venture too deep into the Pine Barrens was to risk encountering not just natural dangers, wild animals, starvation, getting lost, but the devil himself. Parents warned children about him to keep them close to home. Preachers used the tale as a lesson about sin and punishment, and outsiders repeated it as a way of othering those who lived within the Barrens. The monster was not only a figure of fear, but also a cultural tool, a way of shaping behavior and identity. Despite the supernatural elements, the story always carried just enough realism to keep people uneasy. There was always another neighbor who claimed to have heard the screams, another farmer who swore he saw wings spread against the moonlight. The legend never existed only in the past. It was always happening in the present, continuing to unfold. Each new sighting added another layer of credibility, no matter how impossible the details. In this way, the Jersey Devil became more than a story told around hearths. It became a living tradition, a monster that belonged to the land as much as the trees and the swamps. What sets this legend apart is the sheer persistence of belief. In 1909, more than a century after the supposed birth of the cursed child, the entire Delaware Valley erupted in panic over a series of sightings. Newspapers published sensational reports of the devil being seen in towns across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Schools closed, trolley lines shut down, and armed posses roamed the woods in search of the creature. For a week, the Jersey Devil dominated headlines, and though no physical evidence was ever found, the hysteria demonstrated just how deeply the legend resonated. A creature born in a colonial curse had grown into a cultural phenomenon, and even modernity could not banish it. To walk into the Pine Barrens today is to step into the same atmosphere that fueled these stories. The roads are still narrow, the woods still thick, and the sense of isolation still palpable. Even with highways cutting across the region and towns encroaching on its borders, the heart of the Barrens remains wild and unsettling. Hikers and campers continue to report strange noises at night. Drivers on back roads sometimes catch a glimpse of something darting across their headlights before vanishing into the trees. And every so often, someone claims to have seen the creature itself, winged, horned, impossible, yet somehow familiar. The Jersey Devil is not just a piece of folklore from the past. It is a story that still breathes, still mutates, still captures the imagination of those who enter its domain. To understand it fully, we must return to its beginning, to the tale of Mother Leeds and her cursed child, and examine how that story has echoed across centuries. The Pine Barrens remain the same, the woods unchanged in their mystery, and in their shadows the legend continues to grow. The legend always circles back to the same house, a small homestead deep in the wilderness of 18th century New Jersey, where a woman known only as Mother Leeds gave birth to what was said to be America's most infamous monster. To picture the story as people in her time might have imagined it, you must strip away the modern landscape of highways and suburbs and return to a world where families were scattered across the woods, living in rough wooden houses that creaked in the wind, with candles for light and iron stoves for warmth. Life in the colonies was hard, food was not guaranteed, winters could be brutal, and children were both a blessing and a burden. Each extra mouth to feed meant more strain on the family's survival. The woman at the center of the story, usually called Mother Leeds in the retellings, is less a historical figure than a symbol. Some versions identify her as Deborah Leeds, a real woman who lived in the region in the early 1700s, married to a man named Japhet Leeds. Records show they had 12 children, and it is easy to see how that fact could have grown into the seed of the tale. In an era when superstition and hardship walked hand in hand, a family with so many children would have been viewed with equal parts wonder and suspicion. A 13th pregnancy, especially in such harsh conditions, could easily be transformed by rumor into something sinister. According to the oldest accounts, When Mother Leeds learned she was pregnant for the 13th time, she raised her hands in frustration and cursed the unborn child. She is said to have cried out, "Let it be the devil!" Whether this was a genuine plea to the forces of darkness or simply an expression of despair is impossible to know, but the words mattered less than the belief that followed. To her neighbours and to later storytellers, this curse became prophecy. The details of the birth vary depending on who tells the story. In some versions, the child was born perfectly human, but transformed within minutes, its body stretching and twisting into a grotesque form. In others, it was born monstrous from the start, with a horse-like head, cloven hooves, bat-like wings, and a long forked tail. The midwives and family members present are said to have watched in horror as the creature shrieked, thrashed about the room, and then bolted up the chimney into the night sky, leaving destruction behind. Some versions even claim that it killed the midwife, or terrified those gathered so completely that they never spoke of it again. These images are not gentle. They are as shocking and grotesque as any tale from European folklore, but they reflect something essential about the anxieties of early colonial life. Birth was always a moment of danger. Women often died in childbirth, and children were frequently stillborn or lost in infancy. To explain these tragedies, people turned to the supernatural. A difficult birth could be blamed on witchcraft, on a curse, or on the devil himself. When life balanced so precariously on the edge of survival, it made sense to imagine darker forces lurking just beyond the walls of the home. The story of Mother Leeds is the embodiment of those fears. Over time, storytellers embellished the night of the birth, adding more dramatic touches. Thunderstorms raged outside, lightning flashed across the sky, and the wind howled through the trees, as if the natural world itself was reacting to the arrival of something unnatural. Some accounts describe priests being called to bless the house, only to have their prayers fail. Others describe the infant growing to full size in moments, filling the room with its monstrous shape before bursting free. Each variation intensified the sense that this was not just a misfortune or an unlucky event, but an intrusion of the diabolical into the human world. It is important to remember that the early American colonies were still steeped in the Puritan mindset of sin, punishment, and divine judgment. The Salem witch trials were not far removed from the time of the Leeds family, and suspicion of women, especially those who appeared unlucky, quarrelsome, or outside the norms of society, was common. A mother cursed with too many children could easily become a target for gossip. If her 13th child died young, neighbours might whisper that the devil had taken it. If the child was sickly or deformed, rumours could transform it into something monstrous. By the time the legend solidified, the tale of Mother Leeds had become a morality story, a cautionary reminder of what could happen when despair, poverty, and curses mix together. Folklorists often point out that the number 13 itself carries symbolic weight. Long before the Leeds story was told, 13 was considered unlucky in many European traditions. It is one more than 12, a number associated with completeness. The 12 months of the year, the 12 apostles, the 12 signs of the zodiac. 13 pushes beyond the boundary of order into chaos. A 13th child, therefore, was a symbol of imbalance, an excess that disrupted the harmony of the household. By making the 13th child the devil, the legend personified that sense of danger. The Leeds family themselves, or at least their reputation, played a role in how the legend grew. The Leeds name was associated with an almanac published in colonial New Jersey by Daniel Leeds, a figure who became controversial in his time. Daniel Leeds was accused of dabbling in occult symbols and astrological charts in his publications, drawing criticism from his Quaker neighbors. Later, his family's almanac would become a rival to Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac, and Franklin himself took jabs at the Leeds, calling them names that linked them to devils and monsters. Over the years, the Leeds family coat of arms, which featured winged creatures resembling dragons, was interpreted as further evidence of their diabolical associations. By the 19th century, when the Jersey Devil legend was widely circulated, the Leeds name was inseparable from the myth. Thus, the story of a desperate woman cursing her 13th child fused with the reputation of a controversial family and with broader colonial fears. It created a myth that was both personal and communal, rooted in specific details but carrying universal themes of sin, punishment, and fear of the unknown. When people spoke of the devil in the pines, they were not just talking about a monster. They were talking about the anxieties of childbirth, the dangers of poverty, the fear of women who stepped outside prescribed roles, and the ever-present possibility that the wilderness itself harbored powers beyond human control. What makes this origin story especially powerful is that it does not end with the birth. The monster does not remain confined to the Leeds household. By bursting through the chimney and vanishing into the woods, it becomes part of the environment. The pine barrens themselves are transformed into its lair. Every cry in the night, every unexplained disappearance, every strange track in the sand can now be attributed to the devil. The curse of one family becomes the haunting of an entire region. The Barrens are not just a forest anymore. They are the cradle of a monster. As the legend spread, the details of the birth were retold endlessly. Newspapers in the 19th century published lurid accounts of the cursed child. Storytellers around campfires added new flourishes. Some claimed the devil returned to visit its mother years later, terrifying her once again. Others said the child was baptized and rejected by the church, forever sealing its fate as a creature of darkness. These variations show how adaptable the story was. It could be retold in any setting, with new details added to suit the teller's audience, but the core remained the same. A cursed child born into poverty and despair, transformed into a monster that fled into the wilderness. The resonance of the tale lies in its simplicity. Everyone understands the strain of too much responsibility, the fear of too many mouths to feed, the despair that leads to reckless words. Everyone understands the fear of childbirth, the uncertainty of life and death in those fragile moments. By giving those fears a face, the Jersey Devil legend turned them into something tangible. The 13th child was not just a burden. It was the devil himself, a curse that escaped into the world and could never be controlled again. The story also connects to a larger pattern in folklore where unnatural births create monsters. From the werewolves of Europe said to be born under cursed conditions, to changelings believed to replace human infants, to biblical stories of children marked by sin before they even draw breath, the idea of the dangerous child runs deep. The Jersey Devil fits within this pattern, but with a distinctly American flavor. It is not tied to castles or ancient curses, but to a humble colonial household and the rugged wilderness outside its door. It is a story that could only have come from the anxieties of settlers carving out a life in a harsh new world. As the tale of the Leeds child grew, it set the stage for the countless sightings and reports that followed. The birth was the beginning, but the legend would evolve far beyond it. The monster became a figure that haunted the woods for centuries, appearing again and again in new forms, each one carrying echoes of that cursed night. To understand how the devil grew from a family curse into a regional terror, one must follow the creature as it leaves the Leeds home and takes flight into the vast expanse of the Pine Barrens, where its legend would root itself in the land and in the imagination of generations. The night the 13th child was born did not end quietly. In the retellings that circulated through colonial taverns and farmhouses, people described how the room fell into chaos as soon as the infant began to change. What began as a wail from a newborn turned into something far louder, a piercing scream that seemed too powerful to come from so small a body. The baby's limbs stretched unnaturally, bones cracking as its form twisted. Fingers fused into cloven hooves, skin darkened, and coarse hair sprouted across its body. Its face elongated into a grotesque snout, and wings, thin and leathery like those of a bat, unfolded from its back. Within minutes, the child was no longer a child at all. Those who claimed to have been present said that the transformation left everyone paralyzed in horror. The mother, exhausted from birth, could do nothing but cry out, while the midwife and neighbors who had gathered to help stared in disbelief. Some accounts say the creature lashed out at those around it, scratching with claws and striking with its tail before leaping to the chimney. Others insist that it spared its mother, as if some lingering trace of human attachment remained, and fled only when shouts and prayers filled the room. Whatever the details, the ending is always the same. The devil flapped its wings, squeezed up through the chimney, and disappeared into the night sky, leaving only the sound of its screams echoing in the pines. Stories like this thrive on the tension between reality and impossibility. People knew that babies did not simply sprout wings and fly away, yet they also lived in a time when superstition was a common explanation for the unexplainable. The transformation of the Leeds child became a way to explain the terrifying unpredictability of childbirth, the suddenness of infant mortality, and the feeling that the wilderness pressing against their homes was filled with forces they could not understand. The devil was not just born. It was a reflection of everything colonists feared could erupt from the ordinary at any moment. As the legend continued, storytellers expanded on what happened after the escape. They said the creature did not vanish, but instead made its lair in the thickest parts of the Pine Barrens, feeding on livestock, frightening travelers, and growing more powerful with each passing year. In some tales, it was seen the very next morning, perched on a tree branch, glaring down with glowing red eyes before taking flight again. In others, it circled the Leeds homestead, returning night after night to terrify the family who had brought it into the world. Each edition pushed the story further from the private despair of a single household and closer to the communal dread of an entire region. Descriptions of the devil vary, but they are always grotesque. Witnesses claimed it stood taller than a man, its body gaunt but strong, with long clawed fingers and a tail that whipped behind it. Some said its wingspan stretched wider than a horse's body, powerful enough to carry it swiftly through the air. Others described its face as equine, with flared nostrils and sharp teeth glinting in the moonlight. What unites all these accounts is the sense of unnatural fusion. It was never simply an animal gone astray, but a patchwork of features that did not belong together. Part horse, part bat, part serpent, part man. That unnatural mixture was its greatest horror. Folklorists have often pointed out that creatures assembled from mismatched parts appear throughout world mythology. The chimera of Greek legend, the manticore of Persian stories, and even medieval depictions of demons all rely on this unsettling blending of traits. The human mind expects certain forms in nature, and when those forms are broken and rearranged, the result feels monstrous. the Jersey Devil's enduring image as a hybrid being taps into that deep unease. It was a creature that should not exist, and precisely because of that, it seemed plausible to those living on the edge of civilization. Colonial reports began to spread that livestock were disappearing under mysterious circumstances. Chickens were found torn apart, goats drained of blood, and strange tracks appeared in the sandy soil. Farmers awoke to find cloven hoofprints leading across their fields, sometimes ending abruptly as if the creature had taken to the air. For a people whose survival depended on their animals, these losses were not just frightening, but catastrophic. With no clear explanation, it was easy to blame the abomination that had taken flight from the Leeds chimney. The transformation from infant to monster also carried symbolic weight. In European traditions, changeling myths described infants stolen by fairies and replaced with sickly or deformed substitutes. These stories serve to explain the heartbreaking realities of birth defects or childhood illness. The Jersey Devil legend echoes those tales, but with a darker twist. Instead of being replaced, the child itself became the monster. This inversion made the story uniquely unsettling. The danger was not outside forces stealing a child, it was the child itself turning against the family. In this way, the legend embodied both parental despair and community suspicion, transforming personal tragedy into a regional threat. As decades passed, the devil's reputation grew. Sailors claimed to see it flying over the coast near Cape May. Hunters reported hearing its cries deep in the woods, a sound unlike any bird or animal they knew. The cries were often described as blood-curdling, half scream and half bray, carrying for miles through the trees. One report told of a merchant traveling by carriage who felt his horses panic before a winged creature swooped down, beating its wings against the carriage roof before vanishing again. Each of these stories reinforced the idea that the devil was not just a tale, but an active presence in the region. The transformation narrative also gave the legend a kind of permanence. Because the creature had once been human, or at least had once been born into a human household, it carried with it a sense of inevitability. Unlike purely mythical beasts, it could not be dismissed as a product of imagination alone. It was said to have begun in a real place, to real people, in a way that could be traced back through gossip, records, and family names. That grounding in the ordinary world gave extraordinary life to the tale. It is telling that the devil was said to have escaped not into the heavens, but into the pine barrens. The wilderness became its natural habitat, a reflection of how colonists viewed the land itself. To them, the forest was not a neutral space, but a place of lurking danger, filled with wolves, bears, and spirits. By rooting the devil in the barrens, the story gave shape to the fears that the land itself resisted taming. Every rustle in the brush, every fleeting shadow between the trees could be explained as the monster's presence. Children grew up hearing the story, not as entertainment but as warning. Parents told them to stay close to home, to avoid wandering into the woods after dark, to respect the dangers that lay beyond their doors. In this way, the tale of the cursed infant became a tool of discipline, a way of shaping behavior through fear. The abomination born of a curse became a symbol of the boundaries between safety and peril, civilization and wilderness, order and chaos. What makes the transformation from infant to devil so compelling is that it blurs the line between human and inhuman. If the child was once like any other, then what guarantee did anyone have that the next birth, the next family, might not produce something similar? The legend carried a warning about human vulnerability, about how thin the line was between normal life and catastrophe. By embodying that fear in a creature that escaped into the woods, the story gave people a way to express their anxieties while keeping them at a manageable distance. In time, the devil ceased to be remembered as a cursed child at all and became instead a permanent fixture of the Pine Barrens. The origin story was still told, but for most people, the monster was simply a fact of the landscape. It had always been there, lurking in the trees, screaming in the night. The abomination had become an enduring presence, woven into the identity of the region itself. Travelers entering the Barrens did not ask whether the devil existed. They asked whether they would be unfortunate enough to encounter it. From the Leeds household to the depths of the Barrens, the transformation from infant to abomination is the hinge on which the entire legend turns. Without that grotesque birth, the Jersey Devil would be just another unexplained noise in the woods. With it, the creature carries a story, a name, and a face that continues to haunt imaginations. It is the moment when private despair burst into public terror, when a family tragedy became a regional legend. And as the story spread beyond the Leeds homestead, the devil's reputation grew, moving from whispered gossip into colonial memory, where it would terrorize generations yet to come. The creature that burst from the Leeds chimney did not vanish into legend overnight. Once the story of its monstrous birth spread, whispers began to circulate about sightings in the woods, screams heard in the night, and livestock vanishing without explanation. For those who lived in the Pine Barrens, the devil was not a distant tale, but something they believed was happening around them. The abomination that had once been a child was said to have grown quickly, its wings carrying it deeper into the wilderness, where the shadows thickened and the trees crowded together so tightly that daylight barely broke through. It was in this environment that the monster became inseparable from the land itself. The earliest accounts that survive from the 18th century are fragmentary, passed down by word of mouth and written down only decades later, but they all describe the same unnerving signs. Farmers spoke of waking to find their barns torn open and their animals mutilated. Chickens were left half-eaten, goats found with throats ripped out, and sheep disappeared entirely. Strange hoofprints appeared in the sandy soil, too large and too oddly shaped to belong to any known animal, and they often ended abruptly, as though the creature had leapt into the air. The image of tracks beginning on one side of a field and vanishing in the middle became one of the most enduring features of the devil's legend. To the colonists, it was proof that something with wings was stalking their lands. Travelers described even stranger encounters. A man walking home through the woods at dusk claimed to have heard a loud flapping above his head, followed by a high-pitched scream that made his horse rear in terror. Others swore they glimpsed a dark shape moving between the treetops, keeping pace with them before disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. The devil's presence was never sustained. It was always fleeting, leaving behind only fear and uncertainty. That fleeting nature made the legend even stronger. The monster could always be just beyond sight, watching from the shadows. The cries became one of the defining features of its reputation. Witnesses struggled to describe them, calling them a mixture of a woman's scream, a horse's bray, and the hiss of steam escaping from a kettle. The sound was said to echo for miles, rising without warning from the depths of the Barrens and cutting through the silence of night. To hear it was to feel hunted, as if the forest itself had turned against you. Some claimed that the cries were a warning. Others believed they marked the devil's hunt, but all agreed that they chilled the blood. As sightings spread, the legend gained traction far beyond the Leeds homestead. Sailors reported seeing a winged creature flying over the coastline at night, its silhouette outlined against the moon. Hunters claimed to find trees gouged by claw marks too deep for any bear. Families traveling between settlements began to carry weapons not only for protection against thieves or wolves, but against the devil itself. The Pine Barrens, already regarded as dangerous, were now thought of as the devil's own territory. The devil's wings became more than just a physical trait. They symbolized its inescapability. Unlike wolves, which could be driven off, or bears, which could be avoided, the devil could swoop from the sky without warning. Its ability to appear and vanish at will made it a creature of the imagination as much as of the forest. The fear it inspired was not confined to a single moment of encounter, but lingered long after, in every unexplained sound, in every rustling branch, in every shadow overhead. Reports from the late 18th and early 19th centuries describe how the devil began to intrude on settled areas, not just isolated farms. Towns on the fringes of the Barrens recorded stories of it flying over rooftops, landing on barns, or perching on church steeples before taking flight again. In some tellings, whole communities heard its screams on the same night, convincing even skeptics that something unusual stalked the region. The more people spoke of it, the more real it became. Fear spread not only through personal encounters, but through the power of rumor, which gave shape to anxieties shared by all. What makes the legend's growth so striking is how quickly it adapted to the needs of the community. Parents used it to keep children from wandering into the woods. Ministers used it as an example of divine punishment, reminding their congregations that sin and despair could bring forth evil. Outsiders repeated it to paint the Pineys, the isolated residents of the Barrens, as strange, dangerous, and marked by diabolical influence. The devil's wings carried not only its body across the trees, but its meaning across society, allowing the story to serve as both a warning and a weapon. By the 19th century, the devil's reputation was secure. Newspapers occasionally printed stories of sightings, often sensationalizing them with lurid detail. One account described a stagecoach attacked on a lonely road, the devil flapping against its roof until the terrified driver whipped the horses into a frenzy to escape. Another told of a mill worker who claimed the devil landed outside his home, its eyes glowing red in the night before it took off again with a shriek. These reports, while impossible to verify, gave the story credibility in the eyes of the public. If even newspapers printed them, there must have been some truth to the claims. The devil's presence in the Pine Barrens also intersected with the land's reputation as a place apart from civilization. The Barrens were often described as eerie and inhospitable, filled with swamps, abandoned settlements, and families who lived on the margins of society. The devil's wings seemed to confirm what outsiders already believed, that the Barrens were a cursed place, home to things that did not belong to the ordinary world. To travel there was to risk an encounter not only with poverty and isolation, but with the devil himself. The creature's mobility made it a perfect explanation for anything strange or threatening. A sudden loss of livestock. The devil carried it away. A scream in the night that could not be traced. The devil was hunting. A shadow across the moon. The devil's wings. In a region where life was precarious and danger constant, the devil became a catch-all for misfortune, a way to give shape to uncertainty. Its wings carried not only its body, but the fears of those who told its story. As sightings multiplied, so too did variations in its description. Some insisted its body was covered in scales, others that it had feathers like a bird. Some claimed its wings were vast, others that they were ragged and bat-like. Its face was sometimes said to resemble a horse, sometimes a goat, and sometimes something far less definable. These contradictions did not weaken the legend, they strengthened it. The devil was never pinned down to a single image, which meant it could be anything the teller needed it to be. Its wings were always present though, always the detail that anchored the image, always the proof that it could come from anywhere and vanish just as quickly. By the time the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the devil's wings had carried it into the imagination of people far beyond New Jersey. The story appeared in books of folklore, in collections of American legends, and even in political cartoons that used the devil as a symbol of New Jersey itself. It had become both a local terror and a cultural emblem, a reminder that America too had its monsters rooted not in ancient Europe, but in its own wilderness. The wings in the pines had become part of the nation's mythology, yet even as the legend spread, the heart of it remained the same. In the pine barrens, families continued to speak of screams in the night, strange tracks in the sand, and shapes that flew overhead in the moonlight. The devil was not a relic of the past, but a living presence, always just out of sight. Its wings were not only a symbol of fear, but a reminder that the wilderness could never be fully tamed. The Barrens remained its home, and for those who lived on the edge of the forest, every sound of flapping in the night carried the same thought: the devil is near. The legend's hold over the region was never based on a single sighting or a single story, but on the accumulation of countless encounters, each one reinforcing the next. Together, they built a picture of a creature that was not just born of a curse, but had taken flight into history itself. The wings in the pines were not only the devil's, but the embodiment of every fear the settlers carried, every uncertainty that came with life in the wilderness. And as the 18th century turned into the 19th, the stories of the winged monster would spread farther still, turning a local terror into a legend that reached beyond the Barrens and into the imagination of an entire nation. By the time the 18th century wore on, the tale of the Leeds Devil, as it was first called, had spread well beyond the Pine Barrens. In a colony still finding its footing, where the authority of the British Crown met the restless independence of settlers carving out their own world, the story of a winged monster prowling the woods captured imaginations in a way that no ordinary tale of wolves or bandits could. It was not confined to the hearths of isolated farmhouses. It travelled to taverns, town meetings, and eventually into the written word, where it began to shape how outsiders thought about the people and places of southern New Jersey. For colonists, danger was already a daily companion. Disease, food shortages, hostile encounters, and the harshness of weather threatened them constantly. The wilderness beyond their small clearings was immense and indifferent, and it was never difficult to believe that something more sinister might inhabit its shadows. When livestock went missing or crops failed, explanations were needed. Some blamed bad luck, others blamed neighbors accused of witchcraft, and increasingly, many whispered about the devil that had escaped into the Barrens. It was an explanation that drew together threads of superstition, religion, and fear of the unknown, and it was an explanation that spread quickly. Reports from the colonial era describe how fear of the devil became woven into everyday life. Farmers along the edges of the Barrens kept their children indoors at dusk. Hunters ventured into the woods armed not just with muskets, but with charms and prayers. Travelers spoke of choosing longer routes to avoid stretches of road said to be haunted by the creature. In some communities, people claimed to hear its screams at night, echoing over frozen marshes and through thickets of pine, convincing them that the devil was never far away. These fears did not remain isolated to individuals. Entire towns reacted to the presence of the devil. In one account, church bells were rung through the night after several families claimed to see a winged shape circling overhead. In another, militia patrols were organized to track down whatever was killing livestock, though nothing was ever caught. The inability to confront the devil directly only deepened its power. Each failed attempt to find it reinforced the idea that it was something beyond ordinary human control, a force of nature that could not be tamed or destroyed. What made the legend especially potent in colonial New Jersey was its connection to religion. The devil was not seen as just a monster, but as a literal agent of hell, a living punishment for sin. Ministers preached about the dangers of despair and curses, pointing to the lead story as proof that wickedness brought consequences. The 13th child was not merely unfortunate, it was the embodiment of divine retribution. Congregations were reminded that only through faith and righteousness could they be spared similar horrors. In this way, the legend became a tool of moral instruction as much as a tale of fear. At the same time, the story was used to mark social boundaries. The Pine Barrens were home to people considered outsiders, often poor families who survived through subsistence farming, charcoal burning, and small-scale industry. These Pineys, as they came to be called, were marginalized by more prosperous neighbors. Tales of the devil reinforced this marginalization. Outsiders saw the Pineys as living too close to wilderness and sin, and the devil was portrayed as their neighbor, even their kin. To many in colonial towns, the monster's presence in the Barrens was proof that the region itself was tainted, its inhabitants strange and suspect. Folklore often reflects political and cultural tensions, and the Leeds devil was no exception. The Leeds family, already controversial for their almanacs and for siding with the British Crown during the Revolutionary period, became an easy target. Political rivals and critics could mock them by associating their name with the monstrous child. Over time, the creature was no longer called just the Leeds devil, but the Jersey Devil, extending its reach from one family to an entire colony. The transformation from personal curse to regional symbol mirrored the anxieties of a society grappling with identity, loyalty, and the struggle for survival. The devil's reputation also spread through the power of performance. Storytelling was a communal act in colonial America. In taverns and around campfires, tales of the creature were told and retold, each time with new flourishes. The screams grew louder, the wings larger, the encounters more terrifying. What began as a hushed story about a cursed birth became a legend, embellished by each new teller, adapted to each new audience. Fear was contagious, and the devil thrived on repetition. The colonial period also gave rise to the first recorded hunts for the creature. Groups of men set out with dogs and guns, determined to rid the region of the beast. Inevitably, they found nothing but the silence of the forest, the tracks of ordinary animals, or the unsettling absence of any sign at all. Yet the very act of organizing these hunts gave the story legitimacy. No one would gather armed men to track a rumor, so the hunts themselves became proof that the devil existed. The failure to catch it only confirmed its supernatural power. The legend also interacted with the broader fears of the colonial world. This was an era when witch trials were still fresh in memory, when omens and portents were taken seriously, and when the line between superstition and belief was razor thin. The Jersey Devil was not unique in being feared, but it was unique in being so vividly tied to a specific place and family. That gave it a realism that other monsters lacked. It was not just a tale borrowed from Europe, but an American story, born of the land itself. The colonial imagination was fertile ground for such a creature. Every unexplained death of an animal, every shadow seen on a moonlit night, every sound that carried across the trees could be attributed to the devil. And because the Barrens stretched across such a vast area, the monster could be everywhere at once. Its wings carried it from one community to the next. Its cries echoed across counties, and its presence filled the empty spaces between settlements. In a colony struggling to tame the wilderness, the devil was the reminder that some parts of the land would never yield. By the close of the colonial period, the devil had become more than a frightening tale. It was a cultural marker shaping how people saw the Pine Barrens, how they explained misfortune, and how they defined themselves against their neighbors. To believe in the devil was to acknowledge the dangers of wilderness and sin. To dismiss it was to risk being seen as reckless or naive. Either way, the monster had achieved what all lasting legends do. It had embedded itself so deeply into the fabric of life that it no longer needed proof. It was simply accepted as part of the world. The colonial fear of the devil did not fade with time. Instead, it laid the foundation for the waves of panic, hysteria, and fascination that would come in later centuries. The abomination born in the Leeds household had taken flight into the imagination of an entire colony, and its wings carried it into the nation's history. As New Jersey grew, so too did the legend, moving from whispered fear to public spectacle. But in its earliest days, it was not spectacle that made the devil terrifying. It was the intimate, constant dread that it might be lurking just beyond the tree line, watching with red eyes, waiting for the moment to strike. By the end of the colonial era, the story of the winged monster had already travelled beyond the Pine Barrens. What began as a local warning tied to the Leeds family became a tale repeated in cities, ports, and villages across the colonies. Rumours have a way of crossing borders more quickly than people expect, and in the 18th century, when taverns and print culture carried news as fast as word of mouth, the Devil of New Jersey became a curiosity for audiences far beyond those who lived within reach of its cries. At first, it was the sailors who carried the story. The pine forests of southern New Jersey stretched close to the coast, and the towns around Cape May, Egg Harbor, and Barnegat Bay were natural stops for ships trading between New York, Philadelphia, and smaller ports along the coast. Sailors told stories to pass the time, and the Jersey Devil quickly joined the roster of sea tales that included ghosts, mermaids, and phantom ships. They claimed to see a winged figure circling above the coast, its silhouette visible in the moonlight. Others said the devil perched on sand dunes, its cries carrying out over the water. For sailors already prone to superstition, the idea of a monster tied to the wilderness of the New World fit neatly into their imaginations. From there, the story moved inland. Merchants and traders who crossed between Philadelphia and the ports of southern New Jersey brought the legend with them. Newspapers in Philadelphia occasionally printed strange reports from across the river, often exaggerating them into dramatic accounts of monstrous appearances. In one version, the devil was said to have attacked a stagecoach on the road, terrifying the horses until they bolted. In another, a hunter described shooting at the creature, only to see it vanish in a burst of flame. Though these stories lacked evidence, they provided entertainment and gave readers a sense of the dangers lurking in the wild lands still being settled. The spread of the legend also owed much to the unique position of New Jersey itself. Nestled between two major cities, Philadelphia and New York, the colony became a crossroads of ideas, politics, and gossip. What happened in the Pine Barrens was never isolated for long. Stories travelled along the same routes as goods, carried by travellers eager to share strange tales with those they met along the way. The Jersey Devil, unlike more localised folklore, did not remain confined to a single town or county. Its wings, at least in rumour, carried it across colonies, making it a shared legend rather than a purely local superstition. The growing political tensions of the era also gave the story new resonance. As the colonies moved toward revolution, the Leeds family name became increasingly infamous. Daniel Leeds, the patriarch of the family, had been criticised for publishing astrological symbols in his almanacs, which many Quakers saw as occult. Later, members of the Leeds family sided with the British Crown, making them enemies of those fighting for independence. For their opponents, connecting the family name to the devil was an easy insult. Political pamphlets mocked them, suggesting that their loyalty to the crown was proof of diabolical influence. The Leeds devil thus became a symbol not only of fear, but of political scorn, an example of how folklore can be weaponized in times of conflict. By the early 19th century, the story had shed much of its connection to the original family and become fully identified with the land itself. The name, Jersey Devil, began to replace Leeds Devil in common usage, emphasizing that this was no longer the curse of one household, but the haunting of an entire state. Visitors passing through New Jersey often heard the story and carried it with them to neighboring regions. The devil became one of the first distinctly American monsters, a creature that seemed to emerge not from the old myths of Europe, but from the wilderness of the New World. As America grew, so too did the devil's reputation. Newspapers in other states occasionally reprinted reports of sightings, especially when they coincided with strange events such as livestock deaths or unexplained tracks. In these retellings, the details grew more elaborate. Some articles described the devil as a dragon-like beast, breathing fire and terrorizing whole towns. Others compared it to European demons, linking it to the fears immigrants carried with them from across the Atlantic. Each new retelling layered fresh details onto the legend, allowing it to evolve while remaining recognizable. The spread of the legend also reflected broader anxieties about the American wilderness. For settlers moving westward, the forests and mountains beyond the edges of civilization were always seen as dangerous. Stories of the Jersey Devil provided a ready-made framework for understanding those fears. If such a creature could haunt the woods of New Jersey, then surely similar monsters might lurk in other wild regions. In this way, the devil became part of a larger American tradition of wilderness monsters, alongside creatures like the Mothman, the Thunderbird, and the Wendigo. At the same time, the Jersey Devil retained a uniquely local identity. Outsiders might repeat the story for entertainment, but within New Jersey, it remained tied to real places and real fears. People pointed to specific roads, swamps, and villages as the devil's haunts. Families recounted encounters passed down through generations. The legend was both exportable and deeply rooted, able to travel widely while still maintaining its connection to the Pine Barrens. As the 19th century progressed, the devil even began to appear in cultural works. Writers included it in collections of American folklore, presenting it alongside more famous legends like Sleepy Hollow. Illustrators drew grotesque images of winged beasts to accompany the tales, cementing its image in the public imagination. By the time the United States had established itself as a nation, the Jersey Devil was already considered part of its folklore, a monster as American as the land itself. But what truly spread the legend were the personal stories. Families on the edges of the Barrens continued to report strange cries, unexplained tracks, and fleeting glimpses of wings in the night. Hunters swore they had seen it perched in trees. Farmers claimed their animals had been taken. Each of these stories might have been dismissed in isolation, but together they created a chorus of testimony that convinced many the devil was real. Visitors carried these accounts home with them, repeating them to friends and neighbors, ensuring the legend traveled farther with every retelling. In this way, the Jersey Devil became a shared cultural resource. It was a story people could use to explain the unknown, to entertain guests, or to warn children. It was flexible enough to suit different needs and strong enough to survive retelling across distances. By the early 19th century, it was no longer just a New Jersey story. It was part of the larger American landscape of legend, a monster that belonged both to a specific place and to the imagination of a growing nation. The legend's spread did not diminish its local impact. For those who lived in the Pine Barrens, the devil was still a real and present danger. For those who lived elsewhere, it was a thrilling story of wilderness and terror. In both cases, it fulfilled a purpose, offering a way to make sense of the dangers and mysteries of the world. Its wings carried it not only across the pines, but across the colonies, embedding it in the shared culture of early America. The next stage of the legend's life would not only deepen its hold on New Jersey, but would explode into public consciousness in a way that no one could ignore. Long after the colonial era had passed, the devil's screams would cause panic, its tracks would make headlines, and its image would haunt newspapers and cities alike. What began as a cursed birth in a small homestead would soon grip entire regions, proving that America's oldest monster had no intention of fading into obscurity. The Jersey Devil is inseparable from the land that gave it shape. While many creatures of folklore can be transplanted from one place to another, this monster has always been rooted in the Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey. The wilderness itself is the stage on which the legend was born and the reason it survived. To understand the devil, you must first understand the land that became its permanent home. The Pine Barrens stretch across more than 1 million acres, covering nearly a quarter of New Jersey. To most outsiders, the state is associated with bustling cities, busy highways, and crowded suburbs, but hidden behind that reputation lies this vast wilderness of pine, oak, and swamp. The soil is sandy and poor, unable to support the kind of agriculture that enriched other regions, and because of this, the Barrens were never densely settled. Communities formed here were often small, isolated, and short-lived. Some industries thrived briefly: iron forges, glassworks, and paper mills, but most collapsed, leaving behind ghost towns reclaimed by the forest. The land itself has a stark beauty. The pitch pines dominate the skyline, their twisted forms adapted to fire and sandy soil. Cranberry bogs spread across the low wetlands, and cedar water runs through winding streams the color of tea from the tannins of fallen leaves. In summer, the air is heavy with the resinous smell of pine, and in winter, the Barrens are quiet and cold, the ground hard and the trees bare. It is a landscape that feels timeless, resistant to change, and filled with corners where human presence seems like an intrusion rather than a claim. For those who settled here, the Barrens were both resource and threat. The woods provided timber, charcoal, and game, but they also swallowed up those who wandered too far from the path. The sandy soil made farming difficult, leaving many families perpetually on the edge of poverty. The isolation bred suspicion from outsiders, who saw the inhabitants of the Barrens as backward, untrustworthy, and perhaps marked by something darker. Into this environment, the story of the devil fit naturally. The wilderness itself seemed to demand a monster. and the devil became its embodiment. Legends rarely attach themselves so firmly to geography without reason. In the case of the Jersey Devil, the Pine Barrens offered everything a monster needs: mystery, danger, and distance from the centers of power. The forest was large enough for the creature to hide indefinitely, wild enough to explain strange noises or tracks, and empty enough that encounters could never be easily verified. For generations, people who lived on the edges of the Barrens accepted the devil as part of the land's identity. Its cries were simply one more sound in the forest. Its tracks were one more sign of life in the sand. To imagine the Pine Barrens was to imagine the devil living within them. The land itself also reinforced the devil's attributes. The cloven tracks reported across fields mirrored the marks left by deer, but their sudden disappearance made sense only in a place where flight was possible. The cries that echoed at night blended easily with the calls of owls, the braying of donkeys, or the wind moving through the trees. But in the imagination of those who feared the devil, they became proof of its presence. The wilderness amplified every unexplained sound and sight, turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. Cultural outsiders helped to cement this connection. For people living in cities like Philadelphia, the Pine Barrens were already seen as a strange and uncivilized place. Stories of the devil confirmed their suspicions. Travel guides of the 19th century sometimes described the region as haunted, its people peculiar, and its woods filled with danger. The monster became a shorthand for everything that made the Barrens different. In the public imagination, the land itself was cursed, and the devil was its natural inhabitant. The Pine Barrens also gave the legend longevity. Other colonial monsters faded as cities grew and forests were cleared, but the Barrens resisted transformation. Fires swept through, but the pines grew back. Industries rose and fell, leaving behind ruins hidden beneath the trees. The wilderness endured, and with it, endured the devil. Unlike a ghost, tied to a single house or battlefield, the Jersey Devil had an entire landscape as its domain. As long as the pines stood, the legend had a home. There is also something archetypal about the connection between wilderness and monsters. Across cultures, forests, mountains, and swamps are imagined as the domains of supernatural beings. They are the places beyond human control, the spaces where the rules of ordinary life no longer apply. In the Slavic world, it was Baba Yaga's forest. In German folklore, it was the Black Forest filled with wolves and witches. In the American imagination, the Pine Barrens filled this role. They were the wilderness that defied taming, and the Jersey Devil was their guardian, their warning, and their voice. For the Pineys, the people who lived in the Barrens generation after generation, the devil was part of everyday reality. Some saw it as a threat, others as simply a fact of life. Stories circulated about families who claimed the devil had perched on their roof, or about hunters who swore it followed them silently through the trees. These accounts did not vanish when outsiders scoffed. They persisted because they were tied to real experiences in a real landscape. The devil was not abstract. It was connected to the soil, the trees, and the rivers of the Barrens. As time went on, the connection between the devil and the land became stronger. When industries failed and communities disappeared, their ruins became part of the monster's story. Abandoned houses were said to be devil-haunted. Collapsed mills were rumored to echo with its screams. Even place names reflected the association, with areas like Leeds Point becoming permanently linked to the creature's origin. Geography itself became folklore, every landmark another reminder of the devil's presence. the landscape also shaped the way the devil was perceived by outsiders. To those unfamiliar with the Barrens, the wilderness seemed endless, and the idea of a winged monster hiding within it felt plausible. For city dwellers, the Barrens were exotic, a reminder that America still held wild places untouched by civilization. The devil, in this view, was not just a monster, but a symbol of the frontier, the untamed, the unknowable, the dangerous edge of the world. This relationship between monster and land continued well into the modern era. Even as highways and suburbs crept closer, the heart of the Barrens remained largely intact, and with it, the devil's home. Hikers today still report strange cries. Drivers on back roads still claim to see shadows darting across their headlights, and residents still tell stories of encounters. The landscape provides the stage, and the devil remains its most famous actor. The Pine Barrens have become not only the devil's home, but its identity. The two are impossible to separate. To speak of the Barrens is to invite mention of the devil, and to speak of the devil is to evoke the Barrens. Together, they form a legend that is both geographical and cultural, rooted in a specific place, yet resonant far beyond it. The wilderness gave birth to the monster, and the monster gave the wilderness a reputation that endures to this day. This marriage of land and legend ensured that the devil would survive not just as a colonial curiosity, but as a living tradition. Other monsters might fade when their settings changed, but the Pine Barrens remained vast and mysterious, guarding their secrets beneath the pines. As long as people walked their trails and heard strange noises in the night, the devil had a place to live. And as long as stories were told, the devil's wings would keep beating across the Barrens, reminding everyone that even in the most familiar of landscapes, mystery and terror could still lurk just out of sight. The Jersey Devil may have taken root in the Pine Barrens, but as the legend spread outward, it did not go unchallenged. For every person who claimed to have heard it scream or seen its wings beating against the night sky, there were others who dismissed the stories as superstition, rumor, or deliberate fabrication. From the earliest days, the devil lived in the uneasy space between belief and skepticism, drawing strength from both. To its believers, the monster was proof of the unknown, lurking just beyond the edge of civilization. To its skeptics, it was a reminder of how easily fear and imagination could overwhelm reason. Accounts from the 18th and 19th centuries reveal this divide clearly. Farmers and travelers swore to their encounters with the devil, often describing them in great detail, while ministers and civic leaders sometimes questioned whether such reports were trustworthy. A minister in one New Jersey parish warned his flock that believing in the devil's literal presence was a sign of weak faith. Yet in the same sermon, he used the story as a metaphor for sin spreading like wings over the community. Skeptics could not stop the story from circulating, so they often reshaped it to fit their own purposes, dismissing its literal truth while acknowledging its symbolic power. Newspapers added another layer of tension. As print culture expanded in the late 18th and 19th centuries, editors quickly realized that sensational stories sold copies. Reports of devil sightings, strange tracks, or terrifying screams appeared alongside more ordinary news of politics and trade. Some papers treated the stories with a straight face, printing them as if they were reliable reports. Others took a more mocking tone, ridiculing the ignorance of those who believed in such nonsense. Both approaches kept the legend alive. For believers, the reports confirmed their fears. For skeptics, they offered entertainment at the expense of backward country folk. Either way, the devil became more deeply embedded in public consciousness. Skeptics often tried to offer natural explanations for the devil's attributes. The cloven hoofprints found in snow or sand were said to be nothing more than the tracks of deer or horses. The cries heard in the night could be explained as the calls of owls, the braying of donkeys, or even the strange whistles of the wind through the pines. Large birds, especially the sandhill crane with its tall stature and eerie cry, were sometimes proposed as the source of sightings. These explanations may have satisfied the skeptics, but for those who had experienced the events firsthand, they felt inadequate. A cry that sent chills down the spine could not be reduced to an owl's hoot. A shadow that swooped across the moonlit sky could not be mistaken for a crane. Believers clung to their testimony. A farmer whose animals were mutilated was unlikely to accept the idea that a simple predator was responsible. A family who heard blood-curdling screams outside their home at night would not be comforted by suggestions of wind or wildlife. For them, the devil was real because it explained what they could not otherwise understand. Their belief was reinforced by the fear of ridicule. Those who dismissed the devil too easily risked being accused of arrogance or blindness. It was better to acknowledge the possibility of the devil than to appear foolishly confident that nothing unusual lurked in the Barrens. Folklore thrives on this tension. A story that everyone accepts as fact quickly becomes mundane, while one that no one believes soon disappears. The Jersey Devil lived in the middle ground, where some swore by its existence and others mocked it, but everyone talked about it. This constant back and forth between skeptics and believers gave the legend longevity. Each skeptical explanation provoked new testimony, and each testimony fueled new attempts at debunking. The devil became not just a creature but a debate, a living question that invited endless retelling. The division also revealed deeper cultural differences. Those who lived in the Pine Barrens, struggling with poverty and isolation, were more likely to believe in the devil because it fit their lived experience. Life was precarious, and the unexplained was always close at hand. For urban residents in Philadelphia or New York, belief in such a creature seemed laughable, a relic of rural ignorance. Mocking the devil became a way of reinforcing social boundaries, with skeptics positioning themselves as enlightened and modern, while believers were cast as backward and superstitious. The debate over the devil was, in part, a debate over identity, class, and culture. At the same time, even skeptics were reluctant to dismiss the legend entirely. The story was too entertaining, too useful, and too deeply woven into the fabric of the region. Skeptics who scoffed at literal belief still repeated the story at social gatherings, still published reports in their newspapers, still invoked the devil as a symbol. In this way, they sustained the very legend they denied. By keeping the devil in circulation, even as mockery, they ensured its survival. The 19th century produced several attempts at more formal debunking. Naturalists and amateur scientists proposed theories about misidentified animals. Local officials sometimes declared that the devil was nothing more than a hoax perpetuated by troublemakers. Yet none of these efforts managed to erase the legend. For every rational explanation, there was another story of strange tracks, another scream in the night, another sighting by a respected member of the community. Skepticism chipped away at belief but never destroyed it, because the devil was never just about evidence. It was about fear, imagination, and identity, things that could not be disproven with logic alone. Believers, meanwhile, often turned skepticism back on their critics. They pointed out that those who denied the devil usually lived far from the Barrens, in cities and towns where they were sheltered from its presence. It was easy to laugh at monsters when you were not surrounded by the endless pines, they argued. For those who lived in the wilderness, disbelief was a luxury they could not afford. The devil's cries, they said, were too real to ignore, and its tracks too strange to dismiss. Belief was not foolishness, it was survival. This interplay between skepticism and belief shaped the devil into the legend we know today. Without believers, the story would have withered away. Without skeptics, it would have become too ordinary. Together they created a dynamic that kept the devil alive across generations. Each new wave of skepticism forced believers to defend their stories with greater passion, and each new defense added to the richness of the legend. The devil was not merely a creature haunting the woods, but a conversation haunting the culture. The debate also helped the devil evolve. Skeptics who compared it to birds or deer inadvertently expanded its image, forcing believers to describe it in more detail and distinguish it more clearly from ordinary animals. This back and forth refined the monster, giving it the specific features: bat-like wings, horse-like head, cloven hooves that made it unique. Without skepticism, the devil might have remained a vague figure. With it, the devil became an icon. By the turn of the 20th century, this tension between believers and skeptics would reach new heights. A series of events in 1909 would bring the devil into the headlines of newspapers across the country, sparking mass hysteria and forcing everyone, believer and skeptic alike, to confront the question of what haunted the Pine Barrens. But even before that moment of crisis, the devil's survival depended on the fragile balance between those who swore by its existence and those who mocked it. Together, they gave the monster its wings, carrying it from a local tale into a national phenomenon. In January of 1909, the Jersey Devil ceased to be just a fireside story or a whispered tale among Pine Barren families. For one extraordinary week, the legend erupted into mass hysteria that swept through towns, cities, and newspapers across New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. For a moment, it felt as though the entire Delaware Valley had fallen under the shadow of wings in the night. The events of that week remain the single most famous outbreak of Jersey Devil sightings, cementing the monster's reputation not just as folklore, but as a cultural phenomenon. It began quietly. Reports trickled in from rural communities at the edges of the Pine Barrens. Farmers claimed to have found strange hoofprints in the snow, tracks that looked like those of a horse, but were spaced too far apart and cut too deeply into the ice. The oddest detail was that the tracks seemed to defy logic. They crossed fences without breaking stride, appeared on rooftops, and ended abruptly in open fields, as though the creature had taken to the air. These tracks were unlike anything people had seen before, and they sparked immediate speculation that the Jersey Devil had returned. Within days, the sightings escalated. Residents of towns like Haddon Heights, Collingswood, and Gloucester reported hearing unearthly screams in the night. Police officers claimed to have seen a winged figure flying across the sky. In Bristol, Pennsylvania, across the Delaware River, a group of men described a creature with glowing eyes that hissed before vanishing into the night. The reports spread rapidly, and newspapers seized on the story. Headlines warned of the devil's rampage, describing it as a winged terror stalking the countryside. The sheer volume of reports is what distinguished 1909 from earlier sightings. This was not a single farmer's testimony or a traveller's anecdote. It was dozens, then hundreds of accounts pouring in across multiple states. Teachers closed schools out of fear for their students' safety. Factories reported workers refusing to leave their homes. Trolley lines in Camden shut down because drivers were too frightened to operate at night. The panic became self-reinforcing. The more people heard about the devil, the more they looked for it, and the more they saw. Descriptions of the creature varied, but they carried a common theme: a monstrous figure with wings, cloven hooves, and a terrifying scream. Some said it stood taller than a man. Others claimed it was small and agile, darting through the night sky. One police officer reported firing his revolver at the creature, only to watch it vanish without injury. Another described chasing it across yards, noting that its tracks seemed to begin and end in impossible places. The details were inconsistent, but the belief was consistent. Something extraordinary was moving through the region. The newspapers fueled the hysteria with sensational reporting. Each new edition carried fresh sightings, often illustrated with grotesque sketches of winged beasts. Editors knew that fear sold papers, and they leaned into the drama. The devil was portrayed as a scourge sweeping across the land, unstoppable and inexplicable. Stories were repeated and exaggerated, blurring the line between fact and rumor. One day's sighting in a small town could become, in the next day's paper, an attack on an entire neighborhood. The legend fed itself on print, growing larger with every headline. For many residents, the panic was no laughing matter. Families barred their doors at night, keeping children inside. Farmers armed themselves with shotguns, patrolling their properties for signs of the devil. Some communities organized hunting parties, determined to track and kill the monster. Posses of armed men scoured the woods, following tracks that always seemed to vanish into thin air. None ever found the creature, but their efforts only added legitimacy to the fear. If grown men armed with rifles believed the devil was real, who could say otherwise? The panic also revealed the deep cultural divide between skeptics and believers. Some newspapers mocked the hysteria, publishing cartoons that depicted the devil as a bumbling figure chased by townsfolk. Skeptical voices argued that the tracks were hoaxes, created by pranksters with wooden clogs or by misidentified animal prints. They pointed out that mass hysteria had a way of creating its own evidence, with people seeing what they expected to see. Yet the skeptics could not silence the believers. The sheer intensity of the panic overwhelmed rational explanations. For that week in January, skepticism felt like denial in the face of overwhelming fear. The Jersey Devil panic of 1909 also reflected the anxieties of its time. America was entering a new century, marked by rapid industrialization, urban growth, and social change. For many, the old rhythms of life were disappearing, replaced by uncertainty and dislocation. The devil became a symbol of those anxieties, a monster erupting into modern life as a reminder that chaos and fear could not be banished by progress. Its appearance in newspapers and cities demonstrated that folklore was not confined to the past. Even in an age of trolleys and telegraphs, people still believed that monsters could stalk their streets. One of the most famous stories from the panic came from West Collingswood, where firefighters claimed to have sprayed the devil with hoses as it perched on a rooftop, only for it to spread its wings and fly away unharmed. Another widely circulated report described the creature attacking a trolley car in Haddon Heights, forcing passengers to flee in terror. Though the details are dubious, the fact that they were believed at the time shows how deeply the panic had gripped the public imagination. For many, the devil was not just a possibility, it was a reality they might encounter at any moment. The hysteria eventually burned itself out. By the end of the week, reports dwindled, and life slowly returned to normal. No evidence was ever found, no body, no feathers, No photographs that could withstand scrutiny. Skeptics declared the whole affair a case of mass delusion, fueled by newspapers eager for sales. Believers insisted that the devil had simply moved on, retreating once more into the depths of the Barrens. Either way, the events of January 1909 left an indelible mark. The Jersey Devil was no longer just a regional legend, it was a national sensation. The panic also demonstrated the power of folklore in the modern world. Even in an age of science and progress, fear could spread with remarkable speed when fueled by rumour and media. The devil became proof that folklore was not something left behind in the past, but a living force that could erupt into the present. The events of 1909 ensured that the Jersey Devil would never fade entirely into obscurity. It had proven itself capable of gripping entire cities with fear, and that made it a legend for the ages. In the years that followed, the panic was remembered with a mixture of embarrassment and fascination. Skeptics pointed to it as an example of how gullible the public could be, while believers used it as proof that the devil was real. Writers and folklorists collected the stories, preserving them in books and articles. The devil entered popular culture more firmly than ever, appearing in cartoons, advertisements, and even sports team mascots. Its image as a winged terror became fixed in the American imagination, no longer confined to the Pine Barrens, but recognized across the country. The 1909 panic remains the high watermark of the Jersey Devil's influence. Never before or since has the creature commanded such widespread attention. Yet its impact was not limited to that single week. The panic established the devil as a permanent fixture of American folklore, a reminder that even in a world rushing toward modernity, old fears could still hold sway. The monster born in a colonial homestead had spread its wings over an entire region, and for 7 extraordinary days, it convinced thousands of people that the devil walked or flew among them. The Jersey Devil has always been more than a monster. From its earliest tellings in the colonial era to its sensational re-emergence in the panic of 1909, the creature has functioned not only as a source of terror, but also as a cultural tool. Behind the wings and screams, behind the cloven tracks and nightmarish features, the devil has carried symbolic weight, reflecting the fears of the people who told its story and serving as a means of shaping behavior, enforcing boundaries, and reinforcing social order. Fear is one of the oldest forms of control, and few things inspire fear as effectively as the unknown. The Pine Barrens were already a place of uncertainty, vast, dark, and filled with dangers both real and imagined. The devil gave shape to that uncertainty. Its presence justified caution, explained tragedy, and reminded people of the consequences of straying too far from the safe and familiar. Parents invoked the devil to keep children from wandering into the woods. Travelers warned one another about its haunts to discourage reckless journeys at night. Communities whispered of its presence to reinforce the need for solidarity in the face of outside threats. The devil became a boundary marker, an invisible fence drawn around the Pine Barrens and the people who lived there. To those who lived outside the region, it symbolized the wildness and danger of the Barrens themselves, a reason to keep one's distance from its poor and isolated inhabitants. Outsiders saw the devil not only as a monster, but as an emblem of a place that resisted taming. The story marked the Barrens as different, strange, and threatening, setting its people apart from their more civilized neighbors. For the Pineys, the devil's symbolic role was more complicated. On one hand, it was a genuine source of fear, a creature blamed for misfortune and invoked as a warning. On the other, it gave their community a unique identity, the very thing that outsiders mocked them for, Their supposed closeness to the devil also distinguished them from others. In this way, the devil both marginalized and defined them, functioning as a symbol of control imposed from outside, while also serving as a point of pride for those who embraced the legend as their own. The story of the cursed 13th child also carried moral weight. It warned against despair, blasphemy, and curses spoken in anger. Mother Leeds, in her exhaustion and bitterness, had cursed her unborn child, and the result was a monster that tormented generations. The lesson was clear. Words have power, and despair can open the door to evil. This interpretation reinforced social and religious expectations, reminding women to endure their hardships quietly, reminding families to accept their burdens without complaint, and reminding communities to stay vigilant against sin. The devil was not just a monster in the woods. It was a consequence of human weakness. Religious leaders were quick to seize on the symbolism. Ministers used the devil in sermons as a cautionary tale, framing it as a punishment for sin and a sign of God's judgment. The monster became an example of what happens when faith is abandoned, or when individuals stray from the righteous path. In this way, the devil was a tool of spiritual control, reinforcing the authority of the church and the moral codes it sought to uphold. By pointing to the devil as a real and terrifying presence, ministers could make abstract warnings about sin tangible, giving their congregations something they could picture, fear, and avoid. Political forces also made use of the devil's symbolism. The Leeds family's association with the monster was no accident. Their controversial almanacs, their use of occult symbols, and their loyalty to the British Crown during the Revolution made them easy targets for mockery. Associating their name with the devil reinforced political arguments against them, painting them as enemies not only of independence, but of morality itself. The transformation of the Leeds devil into the Jersey devil broadened this political insult into a cultural marker, one that defined not just a family, but an entire region as suspect. In this sense, the devil was a weapon of control in the political arena, a means of shaping public opinion through fear and ridicule. The devil also served as a convenient explanation for the inexplicable. In a world where science and medicine were limited, tragedies often demanded supernatural explanations. When livestock disappeared, crops failed, or accidents occurred, blaming the devil offered a way to make sense of events that might otherwise feel random and meaningless. This explanation did more than ease anxiety. It reinforced social control by discouraging questioning or dissent. If the devil caused the misfortune, then there was no need to blame neighbors, challenge authority, or seek deeper causes. The devil simplified the world, turning chaos into a narrative that communities could manage. Folklorists often point out that monsters act as mirrors of cultural fears. In the case of the Jersey Devil, those fears included the dangers of wilderness, the instability of family life, the anxieties of childbirth, and the uncertainty of survival in a harsh environment. By embodying these fears in a single creature, the legend allowed people to confront them indirectly. Talking about the devil was a way of talking about poverty, isolation, and despair without naming them directly. It was a way of processing fear while keeping it at a safe remove. In this way, the devil was not just a symbol of control imposed from above, but also a cultural tool communities used to manage their own anxieties. The events of 1909 highlighted this dynamic in dramatic fashion. The panic spread so quickly not only because people believed in the devil, but because belief in the devil provided a framework for their fear. In an era of rapid change, when cities were growing and technology was transforming daily life, the devil reminded people that chaos and terror could not be banished by progress. The authorities who tried to calm the panic found themselves caught in the same dynamic. By acknowledging the devil's presence, they validated fear. By dismissing it, they risked appearing out of touch. In either case, the devil remained a force that shaped behavior, a symbol that exerted real influence regardless of whether it was real. Control through fear is rarely explicit, and in the case of the Jersey Devil, it was often subtle. Parents did not need to prove the devil's existence to keep their children close at night. Ministers did not need to catch the devil in the flesh to use it as an example of sin. Politicians did not need to believe in the devil to use it as an insult. The power of the symbol lay in its flexibility. It could mean many things to many people, and in each case, it reinforced a boundary, a behavior, or a belief. Yet the devil was never just a tool of those in power. Ordinary people also used it for their own purposes. A farmer whose livestock had died could invoke the devil to deflect suspicion that he had been careless. A traveler who arrived late could blame the devil for delaying him rather than admit to getting lost. A child frightened in the night could use the devil to explain noises too strange to ignore. These small acts of explanation gave the devil a role in daily life, a constant presence that justified choices and calmed anxieties. In this way, the devil was both a symbol of control and a symbol of survival. The duality of the devil's role, both oppressive and protective, made it resilient. It was never only a story of terror, it was also a story that gave people tools to navigate their world. By embodying fear, it gave them a way to control it. By symbolizing danger, it reminded them of safety. By representing punishment, it reinforced morality. This complexity is why the devil survived long after other colonial legends faded. It was not just a monster in the woods. It was a symbol that served a purpose, shaping behavior and belief for centuries. As the 20th century progressed, the devil's symbolic role shifted but never disappeared. It became less tied to religion and more tied to culture, less about sin and more about identity. Yet even as its meaning evolved, the underlying dynamic remained the same. The devil functioned as a mirror of fear and a means of control. Whether invoked by parents, ministers, or newspapers, it continued to influence behavior. And in doing so, it demonstrated the enduring power of folklore, not only to entertain, but to shape the world in which people live. The Jersey Devil did not remain an isolated story about a cursed family or a local bogeyman lurking in the pines. As the years went on, it grew into something larger, something that fit into the broader pattern of American folklore. It became not only New Jersey's monster, but also an archetype of what American communities create when they turn fear, environment, and history into legend. Looking closely at how the devil functions, we see more than just a regional oddity. We see a story that reflects the way the United States, from its earliest days, has shaped monsters to fit its landscapes, its anxieties, and its identity. Every culture has its archetypes, figures that repeat across stories and generations. In Europe, dragons, witches, and werewolves filled this role, embodying fears of wilderness, temptation, and transformation. In Native American traditions, tricksters, thunderbirds, and spirit beasts carried lessons and warnings. In America, with its mix of old traditions and new environments, monsters often emerged as hybrids, part borrowed from older myths, part invented from the land itself. The Jersey Devil is one of the clearest examples. It carries traces of European demonology, with its cloven hooves and association with curses, but it is also inseparably tied to the pine barrens, to sandy soil, cranberry bogs, and pine forests that had no equivalent in the Old World. In that blend, we see the beginnings of a distinctly American archetype. The devil embodies the wilderness as both resource and threat. For early settlers, the land was life-giving but also dangerous, a place where survival was never guaranteed. The monster captured this tension. It could fly from farm to farm, destroying livestock and frightening families, reminding them that the land was not fully under their control. Yet it also marked the land as unique, giving the Pine Barrens an identity that set them apart. American folklore often works this way. It warns of danger, but also invests the land with meaning, transforming ordinary places into landscapes charged with myth. Just as Sleepy Hollow became inseparable from the Headless Horseman, the Pine Barrens became inseparable from the devil. As an archetype, the devil also reflects anxieties about community and belonging. From the beginning, it was tied to the Leeds family, outsiders in their own colony who were mocked and demonized. Their association with the monster shows how folklore often transforms social tensions into stories of the supernatural. In America, where communities were constantly shifting and where newcomers were often distrusted, monsters became ways of enforcing boundaries. The devil stood for the suspicion of outsiders, for the dangers of disloyalty, and for the consequences of straying from accepted norms. In this way, it parallels other American legends that warn against isolation or rebellion, from witches to wandering spirits. But what makes the Jersey Devil archetypal is not only what it warns against, but how it adapts. Over the centuries, its meaning has shifted from religious punishment to political insult, from local terror to cultural mascot. That flexibility is the mark of an archetype. A fixed story fades with time, but one that can absorb new fears and serve new purposes endures. The Jersey Devil has been a cursed child, a demon in the woods, a symbol of political treachery, a source of mass hysteria, and eventually a pop culture figure. Each role reflects the needs of its moment, and each has reinforced its place in the American imagination. When we compare the Jersey Devil to other American folklore figures, the archetypal pattern becomes clearer. Consider Bigfoot, another creature rooted in wilderness, unexplained tracks, and fleeting glimpses. Or the Mothman of West Virginia, associated with ominous sightings and strange cries. Like the Jersey Devil, these creatures straddle the line between animal and spirit, between natural and supernatural. They resist explanation, yet invite endless speculation. They embody fear of what lurks in the margins, but also fascination with the possibility that the world still holds mysteries. In this sense, the Jersey Devil was a forerunner of a whole category of American monsters that would emerge in the centuries to come. The archetype is also evident in how the devil functions in storytelling. It is rarely encountered directly, and when it is, the encounter is fleeting. It leaves behind tracks, screams, shadows, and unease, but rarely lasting evidence. This pattern is common in folklore, where the monster is more powerful as rumor and possibility than as a tangible being. The devil is not terrifying because it attacks and kills. It is terrifying because it might appear anywhere, at any time, in ways that cannot be controlled. Its archetypal role is to embody uncertainty itself, giving shape to the fear of the unknown. Another archetypal feature is its hybridity. The devil is a creature of mismatched parts: horsehead, bat wings, cloven hooves, serpent's tail. This patchwork quality is found in monsters across cultures, but in America, it carries particular resonance. The young nation was itself a hybrid, formed from many traditions, many peoples, and many landscapes. Its folklore reflected that hybridity, producing creatures that defied easy classification. The Jersey Devil's very form symbolized the mixing and clashing of worlds, old and new, natural and supernatural, European and American. It was an archetype not only of fear, but of identity. The archetypal nature of the devil also lies in its endurance. Stories of witches and changelings faded as America modernized, but the devil remained. Its adaptability allowed it to survive into the age of newspapers, radio, and even sports mascots. It became a cultural shorthand for New Jersey, something recognizable even to those who had never set foot in the Pine Barrens. In this way, it achieved what few folklore figures manage. It crossed from oral tradition into mass culture without losing its essential character. That ability to move across forms and eras is what makes it archetypal rather than incidental. Folklorists sometimes describe archetypes as containers for meaning, vessels that can hold whatever fears or hopes a culture pours into them. The Jersey Devil fits this description perfectly. In colonial times, it contained fears of wilderness and childbirth. In the Revolutionary era, it contained political conflict. In 1909, it contained anxieties about modernity and mass hysteria. In the 20th century, it contained local identity and popular entertainment. Each generation filled the container with its own concerns, but the container itself remained the same. A winged monster screaming in the pines. The devil also fits into the broader archetype of the American frontier monster. Just as European villagers once told stories of wolves at the edge of the village, Americans told stories of creatures lurking in forests, swamps, and mountains. These monsters symbolize the dangers of untamed land, the costs of expansion, and the limits of human control. The Jersey Devil was one of the first of these uniquely American creatures, predating Bigfoot, the Mothman, and other modern cryptids. Its role as archetype is not only regional, but national, shaping the way Americans imagine monsters tied to specific landscapes. What makes the devil especially powerful as an archetype is that it is never fully explained. Skeptics have offered countless theories: hoaxes, misidentified animals, mass hysteria, but none have erased the legend. The lack of closure is precisely what keeps the archetype alive. A story with a clear answer ends. A story that remains unresolved can be told again and again, each time adapting to new circumstances. The Jersey Devil's refusal to be pinned down is what makes it not just folklore, but archetype. By the 20th century, the devil had become firmly established as one of America's core monsters, alongside witches, ghosts, and later cryptids. It was no longer only New Jersey's legend, but part of the nation's folklore library, appearing in collections, cartoons, and even scholarly works. Its image, whether serious or satirical, was instantly recognizable. The archetype had taken root, and it would continue to grow as America found new uses for its oldest monster. The devil as archetype shows us something essential about folklore in America: that monsters are not just entertainment, not just warnings, but reflections of who we are. They embody our fears, our boundaries, our identities. They carry the weight of history and the unpredictability of the future. And in the case of the Jersey Devil, they scream through the pines to remind us that the land we live in is never fully tamed, that the fears we carry are never fully silenced, and that the stories we tell are never just stories. They are mirrors of ourselves. Though the Jersey Devil is firmly rooted in the soil of New Jersey, its shape and meaning cannot be understood without looking back to Europe, where settlers carried centuries of stories about demons, witches, and cursed children. The creature that emerged in the Pine Barrens may be unique to America, but the cultural ingredients that gave it life were inherited from the Old World. When colonists described cloven hooves, bat-like wings, a serpent's tail, and the cursed 13th child, they were not inventing these ideas from nothing. They were drawing from a deep well of European belief that had long associated misfortune, deformity, and wilderness with the work of the devil. In medieval and early modern Europe, the devil was not just an abstract symbol of evil. He was believed to walk the earth, to tempt people, to leave physical marks, and to take monstrous forms. Church sermons, woodcuts, and popular ballads all reinforce this idea, presenting the devil as a figure with horns, hooves, wings, and a goat-like face. These images became part of the cultural imagination, repeated across generations until they became shorthand for anything unnatural or wicked. When settlers in New Jersey spoke of the Leeds child transforming into a winged monster, they were drawing on this imagery. The features described, animal parts stitched together into a grotesque whole, were the very same ones Europeans had long used to depict demons. The story of Mother Leeds cursing her unborn child also echoes European traditions of witches and their familiars. In England and on the continent, witches were often accused of giving birth to unnatural creatures or of nurturing demonic familiars that took the form of animals with mixed or monstrous traits. Trials in the 17th century frequently included testimony about women bearing monstrous children as punishment for sin or witchcraft. In this context, the Leeds tale would have sounded familiar to colonists steeped in these traditions. A woman overwhelmed by despair curses her child, and out of her womb comes not a baby, but a demon. This was a scenario that resonated with centuries of witch lore. The number 13 also carried weight from Europe. Long associated with misfortune, it was a number that appeared in stories of curses, bad luck, and superstition. In a world where infant mortality was high and childbirth dangerous, the idea that the 13th child could bring doom was a way of turning tragedy into a moral lesson. For European settlers, the idea of a cursed 13th child born in the wilderness of America fit neatly into their inherited worldview. It connected the dangers of the New World to the warnings of the Old. There are also echoes of changeling myths in the Jersey Devil legend. In much of Europe, families believed that fairies or demons could steal healthy infants and replace them with sickly or deformed substitutes. These changelings were often described as shriveled, strange, or animal-like, and their presence was used to explain childhood illness or disability. The Leeds Devil story inverts this pattern. Rather than being replaced by a monster, the child itself becomes one. But the underlying fear is the same, that what should be a source of life and hope could instead become a source of horror. The colonial story of the devil carries forward this European anxiety, reshaped for the American wilderness. The wilderness itself was also filtered through European imagination. For centuries, Europeans had associated forests with danger, witches, and demons. The Brothers Grimm collected fairy tales filled with dark woods where children were lost, witches built houses, and wolves prowled. In England, the forest was often depicted as the devil's playground, a place where order gave way to chaos. When colonists encountered the vast, seemingly endless Pine Barrens, they mapped these fears onto it. the forest became a stage for the devil, not because the land itself demanded it, but because their inherited stories made it seem inevitable. Even the cries attributed to the Jersey Devil, half scream, half bray, carrying for miles through the night, echoed European tales of witches' sabbaths and demons calling out in the dark. In Europe, unexplained noises in the night were often attributed to spirits, banshees, or the devil himself. The colonists brought this interpretive framework with them, and when they heard strange sounds in the Barrens, they drew the same conclusion: the devil was near. The figure of the Leeds devil also mirrors older European practices of demonizing families or individuals who stood apart from the community. In medieval villages, families accused of heresy, witchcraft, or disloyalty could find themselves branded with monstrous reputations. Stories spread that they consorted with demons, that their children were cursed, that their lineage was tainted. The Leeds family, with its controversial almanacs and political loyalties, became the American echo of this tradition. By associating their name with a demon, the community marked them as outsiders in the same way Europeans had done for centuries. It is telling that when the devil appeared in newspapers and popular prints, its image often closely resembled European depictions of demons from centuries earlier. Artists who had never seen the Pine Barrens, and who knew little of the local details, defaulted to drawing creatures with horns, wings, hooves, and tails, the very iconography imported from Europe. This shows how deeply the Old World imagery shaped the New World legend. Even as the story evolved in America, its visual and symbolic vocabulary remained tied to Europe's long history of demonology. The persistence of these echoes reminds us that folklore is rarely created from scratch. Instead, it is adapted, reshaped, and transplanted. The Jersey Devil was born in New Jersey, but its DNA is European. Its cloven hooves come from centuries of demon art. Its cursed birth comes from witch trials and changeling myths. Its wilderness lair comes from fairy tales and sermons warning against the dangers of the forest. What makes it distinctly American is not the raw material, but the way those elements were combined and rooted in a new landscape. The echoes also help explain why the devil endured. Colonists could have dismissed strange sounds in the woods as animals, or explained family misfortune without resorting to the supernatural. But because they already carried with them a framework for interpreting the world through demons, witches, and curses, they had a ready-made explanation. The Leeds story did not have to convince people from scratch, it only had to activate beliefs they already held. This gave the legend an authority it might not otherwise have had. By the 19th century, these echoes were less about literal belief in witches and more about cultural memory. Few Americans still believed in witch trials, but the imagery of curses and demons remained powerful. The Jersey Devil became a way of keeping those old fears alive in a modern context. It was a reminder that even as America grew more rational and scientific, the shadows of Europe's superstitions lingered in its folklore. The Jersey Devil thus stands as a bridge between worlds. It connects the demon-haunted Europe of the past with the monster-haunted America of the present. It carries forward images of witches and curses, but plants them in the sandy soil of the Pine Barrens. It shows how stories adapt when people move across oceans, carrying their fears with them and reshaping them to fit new landscapes. And in doing so, it demonstrates how folklore is both deeply local and profoundly global, shaped by the places people inhabit, but also by the memories they cannot leave behind. The Jersey Devil may be the most famous inhabitant of the Pine Barrens, but the land itself has always carried its own dark reputation. Long before highways carved their way across New Jersey and suburbs sprawled outward from its cities, the Barrens stood apart, vast, isolated, and untamed. To outsiders, they were a blank space on the map, a region difficult to farm, poor in resources, and home to people who lived beyond the reach of normal society. To those who lived within them, they were simply home, a place of resilience, struggle, and survival. But to the wider world, the Pine Barrens came to embody something else entirely: a haunted forest, a space where the normal rules of life no longer applied, and where monsters, ghosts, and strange happenings could always be imagined. The scale of the Barrens is the first element that fed this reputation. Spanning more than 1 million acres, they stretch across the southern portion of New Jersey like a sea of pine, oak, and swamp. In an otherwise crowded state, this expanse of wilderness feels out of place, almost alien. To early settlers, accustomed to carving farms and towns from smaller forests, the Barrens seemed endless. The sandy soil resisted cultivation, the cedar-coloured streams made the water look strange, and the frequent fires gave the landscape a harsh resilience. This was not a land that yielded easily to human effort. It was a land that resisted, and resistance always breeds stories. The term barren itself shaped the imagination. Though the region supports a complex ecosystem of plants and animals, early settlers saw only poor farmland and difficult conditions. They called it barren not because it was lifeless, but because it was unprofitable by their standards. This label carried an aura of desolation, making the region seem cursed or forsaken. The idea of a monster lurking in such a place seemed natural. After all, what else could thrive in land too harsh for people? The word and the legend reinforced each other, painting the Barrens as a place apart, a stage for the devil and for every other rumor of the supernatural. Isolation deepened the impression. The families who lived in the Barrens, later called Pineys, were often poor, working as charcoal burners, woodcutters, or small-scale farmers. Their lives were hard, their communities small, and their distance from cities great. Outsiders saw them as strange and untrustworthy, even dangerous. They became the subjects of gossip and stereotype, portrayed as inbred, criminal, or marked by the devil himself. Whether fair or not, these reputations added to the aura of the Barrens as a haunted place. If its people were thought to be uncanny, then surely its land was too. The forest became a canvas for projection, a place onto which outsiders painted their fears and prejudices. Legends other than the Jersey Devil flourished in this environment. Stories of ghosts, witches, and strange lights circulated alongside tales of the winged monster. Abandoned houses and forgotten mills became natural settings for hauntings. Travelers reported hearing phantom footsteps or seeing figures vanish into the trees. Some spoke of ghostly stagecoaches rattling along empty roads, or of women in white wandering swamps at night. These stories may not have gained the fame of the Jersey Devil, but together they reinforced the idea that the Barrens were a landscape of mystery. Every ruin and every shadow could be explained as supernatural. The environment itself played its part. The sandy soil preserved tracks in ways that made them appear sharper and stranger than elsewhere. The flatness of the land allowed sounds to carry for miles, producing echoes that confused travelers. Fires swept through regularly, leaving behind scorched clearings that looked unnatural. Even the cedar water, stained red-brown by tannins, seemed eerie to those unaccustomed to it. Natural features became the raw material of folklore, transformed into signs of haunting. Where one person saw a swamp or a bog, another saw the lair of the devil. Where one heard the cry of a fox, another heard the scream of something unearthly. As the centuries passed, the Pine Barrens' reputation as a haunted forest became part of its identity. Writers and folklorists in the 19th and early 20th centuries described the region in terms of mystery and menace. Travelogues portrayed it as wild, strange, and dangerous, a place where outsiders ventured at their peril. Even when industries briefly flourished, iron furnaces, glassworks, paper mills, their inevitable collapse left behind ruins that looked ghostly in the wilderness. Abandoned factories crumbling into the pines only reinforced the impression that the land could not sustain human ambition. The Barrens swallowed everything, leaving only whispers and stories in their place. By the time the 20th century arrived, the Pine Barrens were firmly established in the American imagination as a haunted landscape. The 1909 Jersey Devil panic owed much to this reputation. People did not just believe they saw a monster, they believed they saw it in a place already understood to be cursed. The land provided credibility to the legend. Without the Barrens, the devil might have been dismissed as just another campfire tale. With them, it felt inevitable, even logical. Of course, a winged monster would live there. Where else could it possibly belong? The haunted reputation of the Barrens also intersected with broader themes in American culture. The wilderness had always been a source of both awe and fear. It represented freedom and danger, opportunity and destruction. In literature and folklore alike, forests often symbolize the unknown, the place where heroes faced trials and where ordinary rules broke down. The Pine Barrens became America's version of this archetypal forest, a space that embodied the tension between civilization and wilderness. And the Jersey Devil, as its most famous inhabitant, became the guardian of that boundary. This identity persists even into the modern day. The Barrens are protected now as the Pinelands National Reserve, recognized for their ecological value. Yet despite scientific study and conservation, their reputation as haunted endures. Hikers still report strange sounds. Locals still share stories of encounters. Tourists visit not only for nature, but for the thrill of entering the devil's domain. The Barrens are no longer dismissed as useless, but their aura of mystery has not faded. They remain America's haunted forest, a place where folklore thrives alongside ecology. What makes the Pine Barrens unique is how completely legend and landscape have fused. The devil cannot be separated from the Barrens, and the Barrens cannot be separated from the devil. Together, they form a single cultural image, one that defines not just a region, but an archetype of American haunting. Other forests have ghosts, but only the Pine Barrens have the devil, and that distinction has made them famous. To speak of the Barrens is to invoke the supernatural, to imagine wings beating overhead and screams echoing through the trees. The Barrens remind us that haunted landscapes are not just about ghosts or monsters. They are about perception, about the way people interpret the land around them. Poor soil became evidence of a curse. Isolation became proof of strangeness. Ruins became signs of haunting. Every feature of the Barrens was read through the lens of folklore. And in that process, the land itself became a character in the story. The Pine Barrens are not just a backdrop to the devil, they are his partner, his stage, and his essence. And so the reputation endures. The Pine Barrens are no longer feared in the way they once were, but their identity as America's haunted forest remains intact. They are a place where history, ecology, and folklore intertwine, where the legacy of hardship and isolation has produced one of the nation's most enduring legends. The Barrens are haunted not just by the devil, but by the memories and imaginations of generations who saw in them something more than trees and sand. They are haunted by the very idea of mystery, and that is a haunting that will never fade. By the 20th century, the Jersey Devil was no longer just a colonial memory or a relic of 19th century gossip. The 1909 panic had cemented its place in popular imagination, and from that point onward, the legend adapted itself to modern life. As cars replaced carriages, as cities expanded, and as New Jersey became one of the most densely populated states in the country, the devil didn't vanish into obscurity. Instead, it found new ways to appear, woven into the fabric of modern sightings and the kinds of urban legends that thrive in a culture fascinated by both fear and entertainment. The first half of the 20th century saw scattered reports of the devil continuing to haunt the Pine Barrens and its surrounding towns. Farmers still spoke of livestock mysteriously mutilated, chickens found dead in their coops, or goats vanishing overnight. Strange tracks were discovered after snowstorms, sometimes photographed and published in local papers. Hunters claimed to glimpse winged shapes darting through the trees. Truck drivers reported encounters on lonely back roads, their headlights catching something with glowing eyes crossing in front of them before disappearing into the woods. Each sighting kept the legend alive, giving it fresh material to feed on in an era when memory alone might not have been enough. The 1930s and 1940s produced a handful of stories that show how the devil adapted to a world increasingly skeptical of superstition. In 1938, for instance, the devil became a subject of humor in the run-up to Halloween, with newspapers printing tongue-in-cheek warnings about watching the skies. Yet behind the jokes, people still claim to see the creature. A taxi driver in Salem reported a winged beast swooping over his car. A group of workers in Gloucester swore they heard screams echoing through the night as they left a factory. Even as the country endured the Depression and the war, the devil remained a background presence in New Jersey life, too ingrained to disappear. The post-war era brought new twists. Suburbs expanded outward, encroaching on the Barrens, but the wilderness remained vast enough for the devil to retain its home. Families driving out for weekend picnics reported hearing something large crashing through the woods or spotting a creature in the distance. Teenagers, emboldened by cars and curiosity, used the Barrens as a proving ground for courage. Driving down dirt roads at night, they dared one another to turn off headlights and wait for signs of the devil. Some claimed success, swearing they saw shadows cross the moon or heard wing beats above the trees. These stories circulated through high schools and towns, becoming the stuff of whispered teenage legend. Urban legends also began to flourish. Tales spread of the devil attacking cars, perching on rooftops, or leaving claw marks on barns. Some stories had the flavor of cautionary tales, warning against reckless behavior. One popular rumor described a couple parking on a lonely road, only to be interrupted by the devil landing on the hood of their car, glaring through the windshield before vanishing. This story, repeated with countless variations, served as both a thrill and a warning, reinforcing moral boundaries through the language of fear. The devil became a new kind of bogeyman, one that adapted perfectly to the concerns of mid-20th century life. Perhaps the most famous modern sighting came in 1951, when a group of boys in Gibbstown claimed to have encountered the devil on their way to school. They described a creature with a horse-like head, wings, and hooves that hissed at them before retreating into the woods. Their report was taken seriously enough that local police investigated, and newspapers once again filled with lurid descriptions of the monster. Though skeptics dismissed the account, the story reinforced the devil's reputation among a new generation, proving that even in an age of televisions and highways, the monster could still inspire fear. The 1960s and 1970s saw the devil move firmly into the realm of urban legend. Stories circulated not only in New Jersey, but in surrounding states, carried by word of mouth, newspapers, and eventually radio and television. Hunters claimed to track it through the woods, only for its prints to vanish. Motorists swore they saw it cross the road, forcing them to swerve. Campers told of waking in the night to hear flapping wings overhead. Many of these stories lacked detail, but they didn't need it. They functioned as folklore, passed along at campfires, scout meetings, and sleepovers, where the telling mattered more than the evidence. The devil also found new life in popular culture. It appeared in books of folklore, alongside figures like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. Television shows covering mysteries and paranormal phenomena gave it airtime, presenting the legend to audiences far beyond New Jersey. Illustrations of the devil proliferated, ranging from grotesque demons to almost cartoonish creatures. Each image reinforced its place in the collective imagination. What had once been whispered in taverns was now broadcast nationally, transforming the Pine Barrens monster into one of America's best-known cryptids. The rise of cryptozoology in the 20th century gave the devil another layer of relevance. Amateur researchers fascinated by mysterious animals collected reports, measured tracks, and tried to prove the creature's existence scientifically. While Bigfoot and Nessie attracted most of the attention, the Jersey Devil remained a staple of cryptid lore. Its long history of sightings, combined with its unique origin story, made it irresistible. For believers, it was proof that America's wilderness still held secrets. For skeptics, it was a perfect example of how folklore adapts to modernity. The devil's presence in urban legends also reflected shifting cultural anxieties. In the post-war era, when teenagers gained more independence, stories of the devil attacking cars or stalking lovers' lanes mirrored parental fears about youth behavior. In the Cold War years, when anxieties about survival and destruction ran high, the devil reappeared in stories about communities terrorized, echoing the earlier panic of 1909. And in the late 20th century, as environmental awareness grew, the devil became part of conversations about the Barrens themselves, symbolizing both their fragility and their resilience. The monster adapted to whatever concerns the culture carried, ensuring its survival by staying relevant. Even into the 21st century, reports of sightings continue. In 2015, a man driving near Galloway claimed to have photographed the devil, describing a creature with wings and hooves flying across the road. The photo, though blurry and widely doubted, circulated online, sparking debate and fascination. Social media gave the legend a new stage, spreading stories instantly to audiences around the world. Where once rumors took days to travel by newspaper, they now spread in minutes, ensuring that the devil remains alive in the digital age. What makes modern sightings so compelling is not whether they are credible, but how they function. Each new account, no matter how dubious, reactivates the legend. People share the story, argue about its truth, and retell their own experiences. The devil does not need to appear often to remain real. It only needs to appear enough to keep the conversation alive. In this way, the devil thrives as both folklore and urban legend, sustained less by proof than by repetition. Urban legends, by nature, are fluid. They shift details, adapt settings, and change characters, but their core message remains the same. The Jersey Devil fits perfectly into this framework. Whether it is attacking a car, stalking a campsite, or leaving tracks in the snow, the story always communicates danger, mystery, and the presence of something beyond human control. The devil's form may be inconsistent, but its role never changes. It remains the reminder that New Jersey harbors a monster, and that no matter how modern the world becomes, the old fears still have teeth. Today, the devil straddles the line between fear and entertainment. For some, it is a genuine object of belief, a creature that still prowls the Barrens. For others, it is a joke, a mascot or a tourist attraction. But for most, it occupies the space of legend, a story told not because it must be believed, but because it must be remembered. The devil's survival in modern sightings and urban legends proves that monsters are not dependent on proof. They live in imagination, and imagination needs only a story to survive. The Jersey Devil has crossed from colonial superstition to modern folklore, from whispered warnings to internet memes, without ever losing its essence. It is still the winged terror of the Barrens, still the cursed 13th child, still the scream in the night that no one can explain. Modern sightings keep it alive, urban legends keep it fresh, and together they ensure that America's oldest monster will never truly fade. The devil may belong to the past, but its shadow still crosses New Jersey's roads. Its cry still echoes in the Barrens, and its story still circulates in the voices of those who love to be afraid. By the mid-20th century, the Jersey Devil was no longer just a figure of fear whispered in rural communities or a monster that sparked occasional panics. It had crossed fully into the realm of popular culture. It became a character, a symbol, and even an icon, recognized not only by those who lived near the Pine Barrens, but by audiences across the United States. Popular culture took the raw material of the legend, its wings, its scream, its cursed birth, and reshaped it into everything from cartoons and mascots to horror stories and television specials. In doing so, it ensured that the devil would live on not only in folklore, but in the imagination of mainstream society. One of the first major cultural shifts came through newspapers and magazines, which had already sensationalized the devil during the 1909 panic. Throughout the 20th century, editors continued to publish stories about sightings, often with a tone that blurred the line between fear and entertainment. Cartoons mocked the hysteria, showing the devil as a clumsy or comical figure chased by hunters or baffling police. Yet even when the tone was humorous, the underlying effect was to spread awareness of the legend. Readers who may never have heard of the Pine Barrens before became familiar with its most famous inhabitant, and humor proved just as effective as terror in keeping the story alive. Radio programs in the 1930s and 1940s also played their part. Local stations occasionally dramatized the devil in Halloween specials, presenting fictional encounters with eerie sound effects and spine-chilling narration. For families gathered around the radio, the Jersey Devil became part of a larger tradition of ghost stories and supernatural entertainment. It no longer mattered whether people believed in it literally. The story was valuable as performance, a shared cultural thrill that connected listeners through fear and excitement. As television took hold in the post-war years, the devil found yet another platform. Documentary-style programs exploring mysteries and folklore began to feature the legend, presenting it alongside figures like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. In the 1970s, a wave of paranormal programming brought the devil to national audiences, framing it as one of America's great unsolved mysteries. Viewers far beyond New Jersey now saw illustrations of the winged creature and heard accounts of its cries. Even if they had no personal connection to the Pine Barrens, they could join in the fascination. At the same time, the devil entered the world of horror. Writers used it in short stories and novels, often expanding on its cursed origins or imagining new encounters in the Barrens. Low-budget films and television episodes borrowed the monster as a ready-made figure of fear. While these depictions rarely stuck closely to the folklore, they reinforced the devil's place in the genre of American horror. It became part of the same cultural space as vampires, werewolves, and zombies, a monster audiences expected to see and enjoy. Perhaps the most striking example of the devil's shift into popular culture came in sports. In 1982, when New Jersey gained a National Hockey League franchise, the team needed a name that captured local identity. After a public vote, the name New Jersey Devils was chosen, cementing the creature as a state symbol. The team's logo, a stylized NJ with devil horns and a pointed tail, became instantly recognizable. For many people outside the region, their first encounter with the Jersey Devil was not a horror story, but a hockey game. The transformation was complete. What had once terrified farmers in the 18th century now energized sports fans in the 20th. The monster had become a mascot. This shift illustrates the flexibility of folklore. The same creature that once represented sin, fear, and misfortune could be reimagined as a source of pride, identity, and entertainment. The Devil's success in the NHL gave the legend a new audience, one that embraced the name as a badge of honor rather than a warning. Fans wore jerseys with the Devil's logo, cheering for a monster that had once haunted their state. The symbolism had flipped, but the story remained the same. The cursed child of the Barrens now stood proudly on the ice, transformed from threat into champion. The devil also appeared in music, comics, and video games. Bands used its name and imagery for albums, tapping into its aura of rebellion and danger. Comic books featured the creature in stories that blended folklore with superhero-style action, often exaggerating its powers for dramatic effect. Video games included it as a monster to fight, or as an Easter egg reference for players to discover. In each case, the devil's features, wings, hooves, tail, and scream, were instantly recognizable, showing how deeply the legend had permeated popular imagination. Hollywood eventually turned its attention to the devil as well. Horror films set in the Pine Barrens depicted it as a lurking terror, while documentaries treated it as a serious mystery to be investigated. Although none of these productions achieved the fame of Bigfoot or UFOs, they added to the accumulation of cultural references that kept the devil alive. Viewers might never visit New Jersey, but they would still know that somewhere in the pine forests of America's smallest state lurked a winged monster born of a curse. Pop culture also gave the devil a playful side. Halloween decorations featured cartoonish versions of the creature, complete with horns and mischievous grins. Tourist shops sold mugs, t-shirts, and postcards with slogans like "I survived the Jersey Devil" or "Home of the Devil." The monster became marketable, a piece of regional branding that drew visitors curious about the legend. For the communities of southern New Jersey, the devil was no longer just a story to fear. It was an asset, something that could attract attention and tourism. Yet beneath the humor and commercialization, the devil retained its darker edge. Even as it became a mascot and a joke, people continued to report sightings and share stories. Paranormal researchers kept investigating the Barrens, producing books and documentaries that treated the legend with seriousness. For every child who wore a cartoon devil costume at Halloween, there was someone who swore they had seen glowing eyes in the woods or heard screams in the night. The devil's dual identity, both pop culture icon and genuine object of belief, made it unique. It could be laughed at, marketed, and celebrated, but it could also still frighten. This duality explains why the devil has thrived in popular culture. It can be adapted to fit whatever role is needed. A monster in horror stories, a mascot in sports, a joke in cartoons, or a mystery in documentaries. It is flexible enough to survive mockery and commercialization because its roots are deep in folklore. The pine barrens, the cursed birth, the wings in the night. These elements remain powerful even when dressed up in modern forms. Popular culture has not diluted the devil. It has multiplied it, creating countless versions that all point back to the same enduring core. In this sense, the Jersey Devil illustrates how folklore functions in the modern world. Legends do not die when they are commercialized. They evolve, taking on new forms and reaching new audiences. The devil is not trapped in the 18th century, nor is it limited to the Barrens. It lives in hockey arenas, on television screens, in comic panels, and in the stories parents still tell their children. Each new version adds to the legend's power, ensuring that it remains relevant in every era. The devil in popular culture shows that monsters need not lose their teeth when they enter mainstream society. They can terrify, entertain, and unite all at once. The Jersey Devil may no longer be a figure of universal fear, but it has become something more enduring, a symbol that belongs to the people of New Jersey, a monster that is theirs alone, and a cultural artifact that continues to scream across the decades. The Jersey Devil has never been just about tracks in the snow, shrieks in the night, or wings flapping above the treetops. What has kept it alive across centuries is not only the thrill of fear, but the way the monster reflects the minds of the people who believe in it, dismiss it, or exploit it. Every culture produces stories that act like mirrors, showing its people their hidden anxieties, suppressed desires, and collective uncertainties. The Jersey Devil is one such mirror. When we look closely at the monster, we find not only a cursed child turned abomination, but also a psychological portrait of the communities that have carried its legend. At its root, the story begins with a mother. Mother leads, weary, overwhelmed, and embittered, curses her unborn 13th child. This act of despair resonates deeply with psychological truths. Childbirth in the colonial era was perilous. Families were large not only out of tradition, but because infant mortality was high. A woman faced repeated cycles of pregnancy, pain, and loss, often with little support and immense pressure to endure without complaint. In this context, the idea of a mother snapping, rejecting her role, speaking a curse, unleashing her frustration, becomes a projection of very real fears about motherhood. The cursed infant who turns into a monster is the embodiment of those fears. The anxiety that something natural and sacred could twist into something horrific, that the bond between mother and child could break. This fear is not unique to New Jersey. In many cultures, stories of changelings, cursed children, or monstrous births reflect anxieties about reproduction, survival, and parental failure. The Jersey Devil carries these universal themes into the specific soil of the Pine Barrens. It reflects the psychological strain of families who lived on the edge, where another mouth to feed could mean hardship, and where despair could feel like a sin powerful enough to summon demons. In the Devil's birth, we glimpse a mirror of guilt and exhaustion, projected outward as a monster that embodied what people dared not admit to themselves. The devil also mirrors anxieties about community and isolation. From the beginning, it was tied to the Leeds family, who were mocked, distrusted, and eventually branded as diabolical. This reflects a common human impulse: to project fears and suspicions onto outsiders, to turn difference into monstrosity. The psychological function of such stories is to create cohesion by identifying an enemy, even if that enemy is not real. In demonizing the Leeds family, the community reinforced its own sense of unity and righteousness. The monster was not only a cursed child, but the embodiment of social rejection, a mirror of the ways humans use stories to define who belongs and who does not. The devil's form itself is psychologically revealing. It is a creature of parts that do not fit together: a horse-like head, bat wings, cloven hooves, a serpent's tail. This hybridity is unsettling because it breaks the categories through which we make sense of the world. Humans rely on patterns. We find comfort in the familiar. When those patterns are violated, when features of different animals are fused into a single body, the result feels grotesque even before it acts. Psychologists describe this as the uncanny, the unease that arises when something is almost familiar but not quite right. The Jersey Devil's body is uncanny made flesh, a projection of the discomfort people feel when boundaries blur. It is a mirror of the human need for order and the terror we feel when order dissolves. The monster's wings add another layer to this psychological reflection. Wings represent freedom, movement, and power. For those who fear the devil, its wings symbolize the uncontrollable nature of terror. It could appear anywhere, cross any boundary, defy any wall or fence. In a psychological sense, this reflects the fear of vulnerability, the awareness that danger can strike without warning, from directions we cannot control. The devil in the sky mirrors the human recognition that safety is always fragile, that threats cannot be contained. Its flight embodies anxiety itself, unpredictable and inescapable. The screams of the devil also function as a mirror. Witnesses often describe them as mixtures of familiar sounds: a woman's shriek, a horse's bray, an unearthly wail. This confusion of sound mirrors the psychological experience of dread, when ordinary sensations twist into something terrifying. The cries heard in the night reflect the way fear distorts perception, turning wind, animals, or echoes into evidence of a monster. In this way, the devil is not only a projection of fear, but a demonstration of it, a living metaphor for how anxiety transforms the world into something uncanny. On a larger scale, the devil mirrors cultural anxieties about wilderness. The Pine Barrens were vast, poor in resources, and resistant to settlement. To settlers accustomed to taming land, the Barrens seemed alien, a place that defied their efforts. By placing a monster there, people projected their frustration and unease onto the environment. The devil became the face of the land's hostility, a psychological explanation for why it could not be conquered. The mirror here reflects the human tendency to personify natural challenges, to see in the resistance of soil and forest a malevolent will. The devil was the wilderness looking back at the settlers, showing them their own vulnerability. The psychological mirror extends into the events of 1909. The mass panic of that week demonstrates how collective fear can become contagious. People reported tracks that vanished into thin air, screams that carried for miles, creatures swooping across rooftops. Psychologists recognize this as mass hysteria, when suggestion and expectation shape perception. The devil, in this moment, was a mirror of social anxiety in an era of change. The new century brought technology, urbanization, and uncertainty. The monster embodied the unease of people who sensed that the world was shifting faster than they could control. Their fear was real, even if the creature was not. The devil was the form that fear took, a projection of collective anxiety onto the night sky. Even the devil's endurance in modern times can be understood psychologically. People continue to see it not because there is proof, but because the story gives shape to feelings that never vanish. Fear of isolation, fear of the unknown, fear of chaos. These are constants of the human condition. The devil remains relevant because it continues to mirror these fears in new forms. In the 20th century, it mirrored anxieties about teenage rebellion, appearing in urban legends of lovers' lanes. In the Cold War era, it mirrored fears of destruction and invasion. In the 21st century, it mirrors the sense that mystery still lurks, even in a world mapped by satellites and dominated by science. The monster's ability to adapt shows that the fears it reflects are not bound to one era, but are woven into human psychology itself. The devil also mirrors the dual nature of human fascination with monsters. On the one hand, we fear them. On the other, we are drawn to them. The Jersey Devil is terrifying, yet it is also a mascot, a tourist attraction, and a subject of humor. This ambivalence reflects a deeper truth. Monsters allow us to engage with fear safely. By laughing at the devil, by cheering for the devil's hockey team, by buying souvenirs with its image, people play with the very thing they fear. The psychological mirror here shows our ability to transform terror into entertainment, to tame fear by turning it into a story we can control. The devil, in this sense, reflects not only our anxieties, but our resilience, our ability to adapt fear into identity. At the most fundamental level, the Jersey Devil mirrors the human struggle with the unknown. It is a creature that cannot be proven or disproven, that appears and vanishes, that resists definition. In this way, it reflects our confrontation with uncertainty itself. We crave answers, but we live in a world where many questions remain unresolved. The devil embodies that tension, giving uncertainty a face and a voice. It is the mirror of our need for meaning and our fear that meaning may not exist. To believe in the devil, or even to tell its story, is to acknowledge the mystery at the heart of human existence. The Jersey Devil as a psychological mirror shows us why the legend has lasted so long. It is not just a story of a cursed child or a monster in the woods. It is a projection of fear, guilt, desire, and uncertainty, a reflection of the human condition. Every time someone hears a scream in the Barrens or sees a shadow across the road, they are not only imagining a monster, they are seeing themselves, their own fears and hopes reflected in the night. And that is why the devil endures. Monsters fade when they lose their relevance. The Jersey Devil survives because it continues to show us who we are, in all our vulnerability, our imagination, and our need for stories that capture the things we cannot explain. The Jersey Devil exists because people believe in it. That belief may take different forms. Some treat it as literal truth, others as folklore, others as entertainment. But belief is the fuel that has kept the creature alive for nearly 3 centuries. What makes the legend so enduring is not just the monster itself, but the paradox at the heart of belief. People fear the devil, yet they also embrace it. They laugh at it, yet they keep telling its story. They dismiss it as myth, yet they use it to define themselves. Fear, identity, and survival all collide in this paradox, creating a legend that is never fully believed and never fully rejected. Fear is the most obvious part of this equation. The Jersey Devil thrives because it is frightening. Its cries pierce the night, its tracks defy explanation, its wings symbolize danger that cannot be contained. People tell the story because it unsettles them, because it makes the hairs rise on the back of the neck. Fear gives the legend its edge, its ability to capture attention and resist fading into obscurity. Without fear, the devil would be just another odd tale, a curiosity with no power. Fear makes it compelling, and it ensures that even skeptics feel the need to respond. Yet fear alone cannot explain the devil's survival. Many things frighten people in a given time and place, but most do not endure for centuries. What sets the devil apart is that fear is bound to identity. New Jersey has claimed the monster as its own. It has gone from whispered story to state symbol, from cursed birth to hockey mascot. The people of the region embrace the legend not only as something that haunts them, but as something that defines them. Outsiders may mock, but insiders can take pride in having a monster that belongs to them alone. The paradox here is clear. What began as a tale of terror and shame has become a marker of identity and even pride. The cursed 13th child now represents community rather than its undoing. This intertwining of fear and identity shows the flexibility of folklore. Legends survive when they can be both warning and celebration. For some, the devil is a reason to avoid the woods at night, a reminder that danger lurks in the unknown. For others, it is a symbol to be worn on jerseys, painted on signs, and told in stories that attract tourists. Both are forms of belief. One is rooted in dread, the other in pride. But together they sustain the monster. It is feared enough to matter, embraced enough to endure. Survival is the third element of the paradox. The devil is not only about the survival of the story, but also about the survival of the people who tell it. In colonial times, the legend gave families a way to explain hardship and tragedy, a framework for coping with the uncertainty of wilderness life. In later generations, it gave communities a way to express their isolation and difference. Today, it gives New Jersey a cultural marker that distinguishes it from every other state. In each case, belief in the devil has been tied to survival, whether physical, social, or cultural. To carry the story forward is to ensure continuity, to anchor identity in something uniquely local and enduring. The paradox of belief also reflects the human relationship to the unknown. People do not need to fully believe in the devil to keep it alive. They only need to keep the possibility open. The legend thrives in ambiguity, in the space between certainty and denial. That space allows fear to linger, identity to form, and survival to continue. If everyone dismissed the devil entirely, the story would fade. If everyone believed too literally, it might collapse under scrutiny. Instead, the devil endures in the middle ground, where people half believe, half doubt, and fully retell. This paradox is visible in how the devil has been used over the centuries. Ministers invoked it as a warning against sin, even if they did not fully believe in its literal existence. Politicians used it as an insult, knowing that the story carried cultural weight, whether true or not. Parents warned children about it, not because they expected it to appear, but because the fear kept them safe. Fans cheer for it at hockey games, knowing it is fictional, but taking pride in the symbol nonetheless. In each case, belief is both sincere and ironic, fearful and playful. That is the paradox, and that is why the devil has survived. The paradox also reveals something deeper about human psychology. People need monsters. Monsters externalize fears, give form to anxieties, and create shared narratives that make sense of chaos. But people also need to tame their monsters, to laugh at them, to claim them as their own. The Jersey Devil fulfills both needs. It is terrifying enough to thrill, but flexible enough to adopt. It reflects vulnerability while also representing resilience. In this way, the paradox of belief mirrors the paradox of being human. We fear the unknown, yet we cannot live without it. The survival of the Jersey Devil also speaks to the resilience of folklore in the modern world. Many assume that science and technology will banish superstition, that myths will fade once the unknown is explained. Yet the devil shows the opposite. Even in a world of satellites, smartphones, and genetic research, the monster still thrives. It survives not because people are ignorant, but because people crave meaning, story, and identity. The devil continues to fly because it meets needs that science cannot touch. It offers fear when fear is exciting, identity when identity is fragile, survival when survival requires more than just fact. The paradox of belief, fear that becomes identity, myth that becomes pride, shows us why the Jersey Devil is more than just a local curiosity. It is a symbol of how humans live with their monsters, how they turn dread into story, and story into survival. The cursed child born of anger has outlived its mother, its family, and even the colonial world that first imagined it. It survives because people need it, and people need it because it reflects who they are. The devil is the paradox made flesh, feared but embraced, doubted but believed, mocked but treasured. And so the story continues. The devil screams in the night, not only in the Barrens, but in the minds of those who carry the legend. It is told at campfires, in classrooms, in stadiums, and on television. Each retelling balances fear and pride, belief and doubt, survival and change. The paradox remains unresolved, and that is why the devil endures. It is not only America's oldest monster legend, but one of its most revealing. In the wings of the devil, we see not only a creature of the pines, but a reflection of ourselves, caught between fear and fascination, between the need to survive and the need to believe.